Fantastic. We'll vote again. Oh, we're already recording. I was waiting to hear the recording sound. So thank you everyone for joining us at our May 28th board meeting. We'll call the meeting to order and entertain motions.
I would move that we enter into executive session for the purpose of discussing the employment history of particular individuals, ongoing negotiations with bargaining units, pending litigation, and the annual evaluation of the superintendent.
Second.
Moved by Joe, second by Katie. Discussion, questions, debates? All in favor? Motion passes unanimously. We are anticipating a slightly later than normal return. Hopefully before 7:30, but it will be around 7:30 is the goal. So, shortly.
Yeah, really.
That same.
Or North Star.
All right, good folks. Thank you very much. Let me. We are coming back from executive session, returning to public session. Are there any modifications to the agenda? Hearing none, we will continue with the receiving and hearing of delegations. First, I want to thank folks who have signed up. My apologies for not speaking to the microphone. Thanks, folks who have signed up. There is a 3-minute time slot. You will hear a timer. As that goes off, I will do my best to respectfully hold folks to those 3 minutes. And a reminder for folks who have signed up that you have already acknowledged that you are aware of the ICSD policy, which is to not speak about particular employees or students during your comments. If that were to happen, again, I will do my best to politely interrupt the statement. That does not preclude anybody from sending the board a written statement or sending a written statement to the board clerk for all board members to receive. However, during the hearing and receiving of public delegates, any discussion about any particular employee or board member or student is prohibited. And so we look forward to engaging. And I would ask, I have my colleague, Katie Apker, who's going to read names, and please give Katie grace if your name is mispronounced. We would love if you could speak into the microphone so people who are watching online can hear. Otherwise, it's very difficult to hear with the acoustics in this room. And if you would pronounce your name correctly, we will make sure that it gets entered into the record as well. The last piece of housekeeping items is the public comment period is traditionally scheduled for 30 minutes. Should there be additional folks or we go beyond that time, the board always, love the echo. Quite all right. The board always has the option of extending that time by a majority vote of the board. But we'll discuss that if need be when we get there. So to begin with, we will begin our receiving and hearing of delegates. Katie, thank you.
Sean, are you comfortable with members of the public if they want to sit here? There's another microphone to the side if you're more comfortable sitting rather than standing in the center. And first up, we have Dove Williams.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dev, and I'm a senior at Ithaca High School. Earlier today, an email was sent to ICSD leadership raising concerns about anti-white discrimination within ICSD, and specifically referencing the annual Students of Color Summit hosted by IRISE, IHS's affinity group for students of color. The complaint sent by Cornell Law professor William Jacobson alleges that the event violates the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment and Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The Students of Color Summit, SOCU, is an event intended to give students of color within ICSD space to express themselves in a relaxed and comfortable venue. It is not an event created with the intention to exclude white students. It's critically important, particularly now, to give non-white students that space to celebrate themselves in a comfortable and safe environment. The campaign to discredit any action that centers students of color, currently spearheaded by groups like Professor Jacobson's Equal Protections Project and Students for Fair Admissions, is a cynical and unserious one. White students are not being oppressed by being disallowed from attending SOCU, and those drawing parallels between the issues brought up tonight and the civil rights movement of the past should be ashamed of themselves. In fact, white people will be at the summit, IHS staff working to support the celebration of students of color. Invoking words like segregation and discrimination in relation to the summit is not only deeply unserious, but incredibly offensive to those facing real oppression in our community, many of whom are students of color. White students are not oppressed for their race anywhere in America, and to suggest otherwise is to knowingly engage in a dangerous lie. Thank you.
Thank you, Dove. Next up, we have Catherine Cernera.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Cernera. I am a 20-year veteran educator, an ICSD taxpayer, and the current president of the Ithaca Teachers Association, the union that represents our teaching staff. As most members of our community know, the ITA is committed to political action and works hard every spring to promote the campaigns of select Board of Ed candidates and to get out the pro-public education vote. We do this through hosting forums, making phone calls, sending text messages and literature, and getting out into the community to engage in direct one-to-one action. While the district and the board cannot officially promote any stance in elections, our union can and does. Tonight, I am coming to you to ask for two specific things that will allow us to better advocate for a budget that supports our students and our educators in the coming weeks. The first ask is that you recommend a second budget vote rather than making the choice to go straight to a contingency budget. Although running a second vote will take significant effort and expenditure, my experiences of working to get out the vote for the first budget highlight how incomplete the information voters had on May 21st was. Over the past month, I have engaged in numerous conversations with taxpayers of all stripes. In nearly every one of those conversations, I found myself clarifying and explaining various elements of the budget, whether it was the difference between a tax levy and a tax rate, the annual per student expenditure, how people can apply for assessment readjustments and STAR rebates, the functionality of our integrated security PA and clock system, or even whether there would be a second vote if the first budget fails. But on the actual voting day, I could not accurately answer the one question voters actually wanted answers to. What specific cuts will be made with this budget, and how will I know that my money is being well spent? While I have sat in nearly every committee and voting meeting this year, and I've heard the explanation of a year-long budget planning process and the inability to provide details for how the budget would be lowered when that decision was made, at the end of the day, I also heard many voters explain that there were simply too many unknowns in the last budget to support voting for it. I believe that this lack of clear, direct communication led us to be one of only 11 school districts in the state to lose a budget vote this cycle. This brings me to my second ask. In order to effectively communicate with voters about our schools and the budget that we need to support them, we need clear, concise, and concrete budget documents that provide specific details of exactly how you will make the cuts attached to whatever budget you propose. Voters need to know what has already been cut from the originally proposed budget, how any newly proposed budget will differ from the one we have today, and what specifically will be cut if a second budget vote fails and forces us into a contingency budget. Voters need this information to have a full picture of what we could be voting for and against on June 18th. And I can finish there.
Thanks, Catherine. Next, we have Dawn Foreman. Okay. Okay, I don't see Dawn. So we'll invite Megan McDonald, our next public speaker.
Hi. I'm a parent in the community and, I'll just make my statement. Having moved to this community in 2022, I have both been encouraged and concerned. We see the results of the DEI's hard work on many of the values that I believe in, and I am often reminded of a book that I read called Hearts, Smarts, Guts, and Luck. It posits that 4 leadership styles are essential to the life cycle of a business and, in my view, to any complex endeavor. This district has clearly been led by a team with heart, bringing equity and inclusion into every class in the district. I see and hear a lot of golden rule moments, both in and outside of the classroom. Compared to some of my school years, which included gang fights and bomb threats, I wouldn't want it any other way. But I am troubled by the downgrade of our schools from the state, and I am reminded of another part of that book, limitations of the heart. Sometimes when a project has scaled, new problems arise that the existing leadership isn't equipped to handle. If the reins are not handed over to another style of leadership, the results will be of diminishing returns. Life is big, it's flexible, and we must pivot with the times. Even Steve Jobs, famous as he is, knew that. A leader who focuses on solving our educational problems can move us forward without undoing the work of our heart leaders, keeping the gains, while refocusing on winning at academics. I believe looking at others' mistakes, like removing junior high algebra and AP courses, combined with using a science-based approach, is what we need right now. Focusing on early exposure to language, science, math, and related technology disciplines will build a strong foundation that includes values of diversity and inclusion. These kids will be growing up in a world with big problems, and they need to be prepared to work with people across the globe with every background to solve issues like climate change, failing infrastructure, and dare I say, world peace. The people of this community voted in new board members and soundly rejected the budget. This is a signal. While respecting the legacy of heart and love that has been planted in our district, it's time to look for a new leader with a different set of skills to help us solve new problems and recoup our foundation of academic excellence. So vote no to extend contracts of the superintendent's office.
Thanks, Megan. Next, we have Scott Yonke. Yonke? Thanks.
Hello, my name is Scott Yonke, a parent of 2 elementary children at Northeast. Thank you to the student representative from the last board meeting highlighting the crucial topic of school discipline. I really truly hope the Rules Committee does look at this and it gives us the deserved attention. To all board members, you are elected to represent the taxpayers of Ithaca School District to ensure that schools are performing at a high level with our tax dollars. You are here to work with us and for us, not against us. I was disheartened to hear during the Finance Committee last week that some members feel that this is not the case. We are frustrated and worried as taxpayers who want academic success for our children. With $160 million budget, the current budget, we see failures within our school, despite what Dr. Brown suggested at the May 14th board meeting.
Please, no names. I made a statement earlier.
That's fine. The data speaks for itself. 50% proficiency in math and 53% in ELA for grades 3 through 8. This is not success. Only half of our district meets proficiency expectations. 50% is an F by any standard of measurement. Accountability means recognizing problems, finding solutions, executing those solutions, and measuring their success. This is not either happening or is not being effectively communicated. Under the superintendent tenure, 2 schools remain on the state's targeted list for a 2nd year in a row. This should never have happened in the first place. Then we see additional schools added to this list That is what we deem as the failure, not as an opportunity to take advantage of additional state funding. This is a failure of the superintendent's role of ensuring success for all students. Academic failure is why your budget failed. The superintendent invited us to discuss our concerns using the data provided, which I have scheduled a meeting to do just that. We need accountability. We urge you, our representatives, to hold administrators accountable and advocate for our students. We need transparency in the budget process. As Dr. Tripp, mentioned in the past, we need a more transparent approach. First, as suggested, require each department to provide a budget 5% less at the current level and 5% more. This will help the board better understand priorities. Second, publish a list of all administrators, their roles and their salaries on the website. Third, be transparent on where we are allocating funds and how those allocations are being measured. Lastly, a question to board members regarding representation. When was the last time each of you interacted with the community members at the school that you're a liaison for? I've been part of the Northeast community since 2008, and I can't recall an on-site opportunity to engage with our liaison. I suspect this is the same elsewhere. Engage with the community, not against us. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. Next, we have Zachary Wynn. Okay, is he ready? Yep. Okay, he's ready. Okay. Thanks.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
My name's Zach Wynn, and based on the conversation at the previous meeting of the board, any budget put forth will require meeting either a 50% or 60% threshold for adoption. If there is to be a realistic hope of a budget passing at an upcoming vote, I believe it will be necessary for the superintendent to step down from his position. Please, as members of the board, encourage him to do so. A more realistic alternative would be to start planning for a contingency budget now and simply cut the administration budget by the approximately $9 million required to meet the threshold for a contingency budget's adoption. Based on my observations of the sentiment towards the district's performance and financial dealings, I don't think there is a strong likelihood of any budget passing at an upcoming vote. It would serve the district in the long term to cut the budget as much as possible to arrest further degradation of people's attitudes towards the ICSD school system. Thank you.
Thank you, Zachary. Next, we have Jim Miha. Miha.
Hi, my name is Jim Meehan. I was here last week at the meeting and I attempted to speak, but I guess it was not a public hearing. So I wanted to respond to a number of comments that were made last week. It was implied that it ended up in a no vote because of a few bad actors in the community. And, I can state unequivocally that's not the case. I am a homeowner, not a landlord. And I went door to door for 2 weeks, trying to convince people to get out and vote no on that budget. I'm a homeowner, and I don't have unlimited resources, and that budget was out of line and it had no definition behind it. It's like we're giving you a blank check. But so I went door to door, and the most common response was people thanked me for what I was doing. So there is a groundswell of support for a no vote. And I just want to, talk about going forward here. We need to vote on a new budget. And, there's not a lot of support for a new budget. I mean, probably all you deserve is a contingency budget. But anything over and beyond the state mandatory cap is a no-go. And I think you'll lose again. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And then the last person I have on this list is Michael Hayes.
First, I agree with Jim that the comments made about voters and we're the ones who decide whether or not our money gets conveyed to the school district as somehow being deficient or malicious are inappropriate and to some extent indicate a certain sense of entitlement by the board that no matter what's asked for, we should just agree. We don't. The idea that it's a few bad apples, it lost by 71%. That's a lot of apples in one of the largest turnouts that I'm aware of in years. Two of the three sitting board members did not get returned to office. Also a comment on the current situation. All three propositions failed. The messages are clear. First of all, that this board is a lame duck board. It will not have the same voting preferences on July 1st that it does today. As such, the board should defer any decision or vote related to the CEO or the superintendent to the new board to save them the trouble of unwinding it, should they choose to. The contract appears to allow that to extend out to July 1st when the new board is seated, and that's what should occur rather than creating more division within the community. Your voters have spoken, 70% not in favor of the current policy and the current operation of the school district. The spending of money, the falling short of schools, even taking into account what the CEO spoke into the Ithaca Times, which lacked math. The New York State Education Department uses metrics that are standardized for schools that lost their good standing, probability on the current course, more will. And we're just throwing money, good money after bad until this gets corrected. I would offer the school board should just put forward the contingency budget, accept the loss, move forward, not create any more division, certainly not put school buses up a second time when electric buses have so many issues in front of them at this point in time. And try to begin to actually be transparent and honest with the community. One of the things I found in a recent FOIL request is that the school board received about $10.4 million of federal COVID money during COVID and at the end of it, and still has $750,000 of that remaining. And during that COVID, raised property taxes the third time, a rather stunning 8 or 9%, they're 8.5%. And never divulged that it had already gotten $10 million of free money in addition to the $10 million that raised the levy on property owners. These are the kind of things that lead you to these no votes and will continue to lead you to no votes. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank everybody who's spoken. That is all that is signed up for this evening, which brings us to our next agenda item, which is board responses.
I always tend to stick my foot in my mouth, so tonight I hope to maybe live up to those expectations, but maybe not. And I use humor because this is really hard, okay? And we're here tonight because the budget failed. And we're here tonight, well, we had a meeting anyway, but we're here tonight to work on fixing that. And I don't feel like we need to go into the same conversations, but I do wanna just say two things, you know, regarding the budget. We are not immune to inflation. As my colleague Eldred pointed out earlier, and I wrote it down, you know, the inflation rates were, what was it? 4%, 8%, 4%, that's 16%. The school district is not, over the last 3 years, the school district's not immune to inflation. We have to pay those costs too, and those costs rise, and that impacts us. In regards to the failing schools, I just want to say, I am the liaison to DeWitt, and I'm lucky enough to be there constantly and have really great conversations with our educators and other conversations with educators in the community and hearing from these teachers who are working with these students in these subgroups. Our schools aren't failing. Our schools aren't failing the students. Our society is failing these students. These students, when you look at the subgroup, I mean, we're talking about poverty is impacting them. They like just getting to school. When you're living in those sorts of conditions where it's just making it to school doesn't even seem to matter, it's a little bit different. And it's probably a life experience I will never be able to comprehend. So we're falling short socially supporting these people. But additionally, when we look at it, and I totally lost my train of thought because I'm exhausted, y'all, so I'm sorry. And I didn't write it down. Thank you, and if I remember, I'll come back.
I thank you and I appreciate what you said because we're definitely not failing our students, and I would encourage everyone to, I know people don't want to hear this, listen to our curriculum meeting that we just had that went through the NICED accountability and what was stated through what, like the schools that are targeted school for improvement and CSI. But I'd like to thank Doug Williams. He's not here. He's our first speaker, for speaking on behalf of the students of color group and what they're representing. And I saw a student give him the thumbs up as he was leaving. So thank you for supporting your fellow student. And we need to always hear and listen to what the students are saying, because sometimes we have outside negative influence that does not need to come into this school district. So thank you again, Doug. And thank you, Catherine Sonera, for your recommendation and always standing proud as ITA president. And thank you to all the other individuals who spoke. And as I will always continue to encourage our community to do, is look at like the frequently asked questions and give us specific feedback as we continue to just listen. We're listening, we're hearing, we're moving forth. And we have an sustainable advocate group of teachers and students here that have talked about electric buses, but we're not going into that discussion now. But just to make sure that we know what is actually happening, and as we move forward where that's concerned.
And Karen, thank you for saving me. And I'll add the last point that left my brain. A lot of these students we're seeing, you know, we look at the BJM and Enfield, and we're looking at Boynton and DeWitt. I mean, there was a lot of, we don't want to call it learning loss, but these students experienced COVID, right? So students in poverty who probably lost a whole lot of learning. And we're seeing those test results now, years later. That doesn't just magically get retaught. You can't make up for lost time. Like 2 to 3 years of learning, just totally transformed. And I think we need to keep that in mind when we look at the way that some of these students' test scores are going.
Thanks everybody for coming tonight. I know I always say the same thing, but thanks for all the public comments. I know it's really hard to get up in front of a large crowd and address a board and people who are in the room. And especially the student that also spoke, who is a senior in high school. I know that's especially difficult. We're going to be having a conversation about the budget tonight with more details. So for those who are interested, feel free to stay on. You know, in the event that as a board, we are able to propose another budget, you know, assuredly it will be within the tax cap. And we're going to talk about that when that discussion continues in a little bit. So stay tuned.
I don't remember who made this suggestion, but I thought the suggestion of publishing a list of the administrators and their responsibilities would be really helpful to the public. So if we can do that, Dr. Brown, I think that would be great. I know it's on the way. I don't know if it's there as administrators. Here they are, who it is. Okay.
And then those positions and.
Well, I'll have to look at it myself, and so should the person who said that it's not there. It might help to make it clearer if it's not. Okay. Thank you.
I mean, to that end, I think what we are hearing from those who said vote yes to the budget, vote no to the budget, we're hearing a desire for more details, more clarity, and that is coming through, and that's a conversation we're having amongst ourselves as a board, with the administration,
That's good.
and together with you. So that is coming through loud and clear, and that's something that we're really focusing on. So we can understand collectively what it means to vote yes or no if we end up proposing another budget, what it means if the district had to face a contingency budget. So we know as much as possible collectively what that means for our children in the schools.
I'd like to also challenge that because we've also been having discussion year round. And I have to thank our administrative team for that at our finance committee, at our facilities committee, and we have had discussion year round. I don't know why people within probably well, I do know tax assessment. Once everyone got the tax assessment mailer, that went downhill for some people, but we've had discussion year round. And we have a lot of items. I know I personally refer people to the frequently asked question, reason being because it's detail, a lot of detail, graph and so forth is on there. So I would really encourage people to continue to look on our website.
Any other board responses?
Yeah, I have some words to say. So it's a couple of things fascinating. No one in this audience, even those who have lived here a long time, stepped up to this podium when I first ran for the board in 2009, when the graduation rates for African-American students were 50%, and the graduation rates for students with IEPs was lower. Why is that relevant now? 15 years later, BJM, we're talking about the same subgroup that this district is still failing to educate. We built a budget over a long period of time based on values, not based on your math. Full inclusion is a value. Culturally responsive teaching is a value. Co-teaching in classrooms is a value. Exciting and engaging co-curricular opportunities are a value. If you cared enough to reach out to me or someone who has significant experience to talk about the moves we've made in all those areas and improvements, I would have welcomed it. This community is changing. Face it, right now we're caught in a terrible middle. The developments going up downtown in the college town, almost 100% of them have asked for significant tax abatements. That means money that's not coming to this district, not coming to municipalities, not coming to our coffers. So you can build and build and build. On the other side of the equation, if you haven't noticed, our poverty empire is swelling as well. Those of us who care about such things in this community have defeated a jail expansion twice. I'm not sure if we're going to be able to do it again. And guess what? You won't get the parade in front of the county because you won't get to vote on that budget. You won't get to vote on the city budget. I'm understanding, completely empathetic to the folks who are being squoze in the middle, especially folks who have paid for this district's quality programs for the last 10, 20, 30 years. I thank you. But to take it out on children, that people are rolling up to you when you put your house up for sale with a cash offer in a bag of $50,000 more, is not these kids' fault. It is not these kids' fault that the assessments went up so ridiculously that it caught everyone by surprise and caught our hair on fire. It is not their fault. Believe it or not, we did not pick the numbers. We picked knowing what the assessments were. We picked them because that was the rational money we thought would protect this district from these conversations. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I am not judging anyone for making voting decisions about your pocketbook because I'm not in it. But damn it if I'm gonna sit here and have you yell at us because we're supporting the children. I can list all of the things that might happen in this community if we continue to let the school district budget go down in flames. You want to talk about contingency budget? I want to talk about kids who don't see a way out, hitting people over the head in the comments. You want to talk about a contingency budget? I want to talk about less of our students going on to college, less being prepared for the workforce, less being prepared to be to have vital impact in their families where they live. Someone mentioned the curriculum committee earlier. 3 of us who were on that committee spent time in 3 schools earlier today, multiple classrooms. You know what we saw? We saw a heavy labor load. We saw a teacher, we saw an aide, we saw a literacy professional. We saw a specialist who had to sit with a kid with an IEP, who had difficulty regulating. That's an expensive proposition. For folks to blame the administration here and a board who busted our ass, in some cases for decades, with the delicious salary of rubber chicken and a salad. You're basically telling us we are imbeciles and almost evil. If you are a builder, let me say this clearly. You take this thing off. If you are a builder in this community who has received a tax abatement to build your properties because you needed it financially, I will see you in the community eventually. My 15 years is over. We're gonna have a tough conversation about you coming here and telling us that we don't know what we're doing because we're supporting children. This is a moment of inflection in this community. Like I said, we got some hard choices to make, all of us. People in the middle being squoze dry. The people at one lower end of the spectrum don't know whether they're coming or going. And they're coming here from Buffalo and Syracuse and Rochester and Yonkers and the Bronx. And the people at the top, even with all your resources, have to ask for significant tax abatement so you can even build here. I'm going to end this again by saying, to put this on the heads of children is abnormal. I'm going to say it, abnormal. And you get to do it because you get to vote on our budget, but you don't get to vote on anybody else's budget. Let that sink in.
Any other board responses? I will keep my responses through the rest of the board agenda as we discuss budget options and other items. So thank you. That brings us to our board reps. I believed last time, I'm thinking we started with Ithaca High School.
This is easier. John, I just had a quick little question. Am I allowed to name people in positive athletic accomplishments, or should I not? I'm sorry, I really wanted to clarify.
Good question.
It is a very good question. We have tried diligently to not do that, and it's still happened at the same time. So I will not take full responsibility for that response, but look to my board colleagues about how they want to proceed.
Can I just leave last names out of it? Is that better?
I'm hearing no objection.
Okay, so we have had a great run in our spring season. Our girls lacrosse team is going back-to-back sectional champs, and their state tournament begins this weekend in Syracuse, so best of luck to them. We have also earned a lot of oh gosh, this is a long acronym. NYSPHSAA Scholar Athlete Teams. Teams where more than 75% of the varsity roster earn a 90% plus for the third marking period, which as an athlete with 12 hours of practice a week or more, depending on the level, is beyond incredible and beyond impressive. And really props to them. These teams are baseball, boys lacrosse, boys tennis, boy and girls track and field. Shout out to Stella. You on track, right? Oh, really? I thought you did. My bad, guys. I could have sworn. I thought it was okay. Unified basketball and flag football, which a friend of mine is the captain of, so I'm really proud of that. Boys tennis, the team tennis sectional champs. Aiden was the singles champ, and Kieran and Jonah Jacobstein were doubles champs. In track and field, we had a lot of champions. We did really good. We had the girls 4x800 relay with Sadia, Avery, Marin, and Eliza. The 1500 meter with Sadia. The 3200 meter with Crosby. The long jump with Josh KM. The 3000 steeple with Noah. The 1600 meter with Riley. And we had some sectional champs, including Rex, Andrew, Will, Everett, Riley, Sadia, Eliza, my Spanish desk buddy Colin, which I'm really proud of, Crosby, Marin, Ella Schneider, and Hayden. We are also going to be having an NLI signing celebration on June 4th in Q Gym, which I encourage everybody to attend. NLI is a national letter of intent. And it signifies the student's commitment to play sports at the collegiate level. We have 3 people committing for soccer, 2 for football, 1 for track and field, 1 for lacrosse, 1 for volleyball, 1 for acrobatics and tumbling, and 1 for rowing. And our fall sports will be beginning August 26th. So anyone who would like to do that, I would encourage you to check out Family ID and the website as soon as possible. Make sure you are very well prepared for the season. Thanks, guys.
All right. The orchestra concert for IHS is tomorrow. It starts at 7:30. I think Rakan and I are performing it. A lot of people in this audience and other orchestra members are performing. And so that starts at 7:30 in Club Auditorium. And then next Wednesday is the band concert, which Kaven and I are performing in. So you should come see. Senior speeches and goodbyes are happening. So it'd be nice to fill the audience and come out and support them. And the choir concert was last Wednesday, and I heard it was a great success. But speaking of Culp, we need a cooling system in Culp Auditorium. So I heard about the middle school choir concert, and everyone was told to wear like shorts and t-shirts because it was so hot in there. And like the orchestras and bands have started rehearsing in that space during school as well. And so it'd be nice to have some kind of like heating solution. And the heating problem also persists in classrooms. I've seen kids trying to find a place to cool down, but there aren't options. And it's especially bad on humid days. And I've had a similar experience as well, but now I know I can come to Lower York because it's cool here. And it's a problem every year. So until lake source cooling can happen in all the buildings, it'd be great to have some more fans or some kind of temporary solution. Because we bring this up constantly. And we know that there aren't many school days left in this year, but it would also apply to when we get back next year. And then last Friday, 8th graders from DeWitt and Boynton, as well as some LACS students, made their way to our school for a Q&A panel and a tour. And the day was planned out by IHS ambassadors, and there were many students who volunteered to help out. Finally, so junior prom was very successful. We got to see many faces that from my class that I don't usually get to see. And it was also fun watching administrators and teachers dance. And our first ever unified semi-formal was May 17th. So students with and without disabilities gathered for the typical high school experience. And since most of our students with intellectual disabilities avoid traditional school dances due to obstacles such as transportation, lack of comfortability, and environmental issues, it was a great way to give them the experience in a different way. And the event was put on by our youth activation committee and our Scholar Athlete Council.
Additionally, we just wanted to say that we support the students who are planning the Students of Color Summit and want to reiterate the student frustration and anger with attempts to dismantle the summit coming from outside organizations that have no interaction with students. In other news, the clock stopped working today. Hopefully they will be back soon, but a lot of the clocks around the school, that one's still working luckily, but a lot of them are green screens. Yeah, instead of the time, but hopefully those come back. There's also still construction going on in the arts quad. I think students are getting used to it. We were pretty sad to see the tree go, but hopefully another one will be planted after the trailers leave. And then also in particular for us, elections for new board reps will happen soon. I'm a senior, but Claire and Cademan, who can't be here right now, are running again, so wish them luck. And then also for seniors, speaking of which, we are having a senior trip on Thursday, but one thing I've heard from lots of seniors is that we would like to have more senior trip options. Our class officers have worked really, really hard on planning this year's senior trip, but due to limited funds and liability issues, we're going to the rink and field, which, I mean, a lot of people worked really hard on it, but it would be nice if we could have more resources to plan something larger and as like a celebration for our seniors. And another thing, we did get portable ACs back out. Even though it's hot in a lot of classrooms, it's nice that those are like out. So thank you for that. I don't know who did that, but it was great. And then also senior prom is coming up on June 21st, which many students are excited for. And after that, students have already signed up for graduation times, and that's coming up. So seniors are excited for that. And senior awards are happening on June 6th in Culp Auditorium. And alongside that, underclassmen awards as well on June 10th. So you should come out and support students who are getting recognized. And we were also very sad to see that our dean, Mr. Taylor, is leaving IHS, but we're happy for him as he transitions to a new role at BJM. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. The revisions for our decision-making document that have been going on for multiple years now is culminating tomorrow in an all-school meeting where our staff and students will vote on whether these changes to our whole democracy will go into place or not. It's pretty exciting news. Alongside that, our 50th year anniversary is coming up. We have a bunch of events scheduled. There is a parade this Thursday evening that will have a wonderful float in the Ithaca Festival. And I should suggest you check that out. It'll be pretty awesome. On June 12th, there will be a meet and greet social hour for all of the LACS community, current and non, oh, what the hell is that word? My bad. Current and not to converse and connect. So yeah, a bunch of people will be coming from before and after. Thank you. Okay, third event. Following that day, on June 13th, there will be a Saturday extravaganza at LACS. Workshops, ASMs, principals, panels, small group meetups, alumni/current student networking. And that will be followed by an evening variety show held in Culp Auditorium. And the final event, there will be a celebration at Stewart Park, very similar to our own Stewart Park Day, but including everybody from over the years to finish out the celebration of the last 50 years of progression, innovative thinking, and joy. Very fun stuff. Now, okay. With Trips Week behind us, students are reflecting on their experiences in the past week. We're having conversations in class about the importance of trips to our school and to learning in general. We are also very grateful that our trips this year were funded. It took a large weight off trip leaders to find ways to raise thousands of dollars for these very important educational and community building experiences. So thank you for that.
Ooh, okay. I let Odin take all of those because there's one issue and one issue only on my mind right now, and that's the Students of Color Summit. I want to thank Dove for that response. Mine won't be half as polished or planned out, but it will be personal. I got off the phone just about an hour ago with another student who's been working alongside me, working way harder than me actually at planning this event. And I mean, we were just in a state of, I don't even know. I don't even have words for it. I think this claim is terrifying, right? That we can't have spaces where we can be comfortable and safe. And also that there's been no direct dialogue with the student planners or with the students of color in the district. And that's who this is personal for. You know, I've been sitting here and while I was driving here and all I can think is like, how and why and what, right? You know, this is an event that has been a safe space for the past 3 years. I'm glancing at my scribbles over here, I apologize. But a space just full of celebration and joy for our identity and our experience. And to think that this would be destroyed by white fragility, white supremacy, whatever you want to call it, is terrifying. And I think above all else that this needs to be a conversation with the people who are directly affected. And that hasn't happened yet. I don't know where this is coming from after 3 years of this event. And yeah, I don't know. I'm kind of scattered. I apologize, but yeah, I mean, this is terrifying and endangering to my existence and to the existence of all the people of color in the district. And it's also notably a majority students of color event, or majority people of color, I should say, because like Dove said, we have staff who are not of color who support us and work that event, because we don't really have the numbers of staff of color to staff this event. So yeah, I would just really appreciate some direct communication, a meeting, an email, whatever it may be, with the people who are pouring their heart and soul into this and have been for 3 years. And yeah, I don't know. I never thought this would be happening in Ithaca. And I think we at least deserve an explanation for all of this, any of this. You know, there's a student leader who is a senior this year, so she won't be back, but she has been holding it down, and I refuse to let all of that be destroyed because of an insecurity, because of a privilege, because of an entitlement to be in spaces that aren't meant for them, and that are meant to honor and celebrate my identity and the identity of other students of color. So, yeah, thank you.
Thank you, board reps. Board responses.
Update, and because you said names, I will not repeat the name, but several of the kids you mentioned, young adults you mentioned, I knew them when they were about this big. It's fantastic to see them grow and thrive. So I can only say to your comments about the event, that many of us who are in this skin and adults have become used to these attacks, right? Whether they come anonymously, whether they come through the reduction of resources, whether they come with personal animus, whether they come with institutional ignorance. I will also say just as clearly that is not an excuse for us to continue to allow this to happen in time loops, as Professor Bradley would say, over and over again. Your defense mechanism should not be an excuse for someone to try and abuse you. Your strength does not equate to people continuing to take shots at you and your peers. Anyone who's seen the event would know, which is why I know this person is an outsider. They would have seen an array of colors. They would have seen an array of ages, grades, sizes, shapes, and all of the above. So I want to say stay strong. I want to tell the adults in this room and around this table, stay vigilant. Thank you.
Additional responses from board members.
Well, thank you for the invite to the orchestra concert. That's tomorrow, and the band concert is next week, right? Great. Yeah, because we have great fine arts program as well as all the athleticism that's happening here too. I wanted to know, when is the Stewart Park event for LACS 50th anniversary celebration? June 14th?
The 50th is for the month of July.
July.
Starts on the 12th, Friday evening, and Stewart Park is on the 14th.
Okay. But yet the meet and greet is June 12th and the Saturday extravagant, July 12th. Oh, so I was off. What month I want it now, right? Okay, all right, thank you, thank you.
Hearing no other board responses, Stella, what I will say is that part of the questions that you've asked will be addressed momentarily in the agenda. It may not be a satisfactory response, and so requires additional dialogue and conversation. And so I'll wait to that point in time to add further comment. But thank you for sharing, and particularly thank you for sharing from the heart. Appreciate it, and the head as well. Keeping the agenda moving. That brings us to the consent agenda, and we will entertain motions.
I move to approve all consent agenda items listed in the consent agenda: consideration of accounts, personnel reports, students, and minutes of previous meetings as presented.
Moved by Adam, second by Katie. Questions, discussion, debate? Yes, Joe.
Item 6.2, resolution to approve transfers which exceed $10,000 of the amount appropriated by the board from the line item from which the transfer is made. Could we just have a listing of those 7 transfers? Because I have no idea what those are. So
Is the request for this specific 7 or any time that we have a transfer of more?
no, in this case, it is a list of those specific 7. So if we have those available, I'd like to know.
I imagine it may take us a moment to gather that information.
Is that a problem for any reason? That's fine. Okay, thank you. It's not going to mess anything up by.
Would be striking 6.2.
Yes,
Tabling.
I asked that we'd pull item 6.2 out of the consent agenda.
Any objection to tabling item 6.2? All right, so the consent is moved with the tabling of that particular item. Any additional questions or comments? Hearing none, I'll add 2. One is a recognition of a donation by the Ithaca Public Education Initiative in the amount of $20,000. We are always greatly appreciative of the significant and sizable work that IPEI does in our community. thank you greatly for that as well. And this is both part of our current conversation and not part. And so I'm trying to find a way in which to identify it without making it a budgetary item. But on this agenda, Resolution 6.5 sets the tuition rate for students in the Ithaca City School District. And just by way of the way in which formulas work and the way in which resources happen, that for quote unquote general education students, the tuition rate will be $10,000 for elementary school students and $18,700 for secondary students. And for a student who's receiving special education services, the tuition rate will be $51,000 and $58,000. Those are numbers and figures that are in part defined by New York State formulas. And so when we have conversations and questions about what is the cost per student, if we're following New York State regulations, that's why we continually encourage folks to use that data for a variety of reasons. And I'll also take this opportunity to say that most folks in the community are not aware that students who are within the Ithaca City School District but do not attend Ithaca City School District schools, the district is oftentimes still financially responsible for their educational programs. What does that mean? Transportation, the purchase of books, oftentimes tuition. And there are more than 700 students who do not attend Ithaca City School Districts and will not show up on our enrollment, but the district is still in some part financially responsible for providing, I would argue rightfully so, for their education, whether it's a homeschool student, whether it's a student attending a charter school, whether it's a student attending a special program. That gets to some of the depth and nuance that we'll be discussing at a later point in time, but I felt that this was an opportune moment to make sure that the community is aware of that, and I would welcome folks to reach out to me so I can provide additional information should folks choose. With that being said, I don't know if there are any other comments or discussion items on the consent agenda. Hearing none, we'll call the question. All in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. It brings us on to our next agenda item, which is Dr. Brown. Dr. Brown.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity, Professor, and for sharing time on the agenda. And as I've shared previously, I wish to use my time to celebrate the genius and joy that our young people and adults bring into our space. And I lead with that very particularly and strategically in every single time because they are geniuses, as you've heard tonight. As I think about the young people who do stuff before and after school, the ways in which they express themselves, the way they read, their enrollment patterns, their achievement on an array of assessments, both qualitative and quantitative measures that we've shared during curriculum committee over the last year. Our young people are not only geniuses, but they're achieving at the highest rates from my perspective, and based on what I've seen and the data we have captured, at the highest rates our school district has ever seen. And for that, I applaud you and I celebrate you and I see you. So when, as we have our challenges, and I'll be the first to mention, we still have our challenges, it's still difficult, and there are some data points that fluctuate. Some data points are not where we want them to be, but I always lead with the genius and the joy. So when folks come in and they lead with deficit thinking and language, I'm gonna always interrupt it. Particularly when that language is taken from a newspaper headline. As some folks came today, they said they know the state of accountability systems and how it works, and we're deemed to be failure. That word failure doesn't even show up in the state accountability system. That language showed up in a headline. And now folks are taking that word and connecting it to young people and schools and the adults who serve our buildings. As I'm looking at some who are achieving at the highest rates anywhere else in from the other student in school district in the country. So if you're going to come in and quote words and use words, please bring your data and I'll bring mine. But I'll ask you first lead with the genius and joys and seeing their humanity, which leads me to the next one. And I'm going to be slow here. And I never read from a paper, but I may have to read because I want to be careful with this one because it's going to be recorded and it's going to be shared internationally, as we've learned, when it comes to our Student of Color Summit. And because sometimes you have to force people to see your humanity, I'm going to lead with something that's human. just like in our school district, I have been a part of affinity groups all my life. Every Sunday and Wednesday, I went to a place where an affinity group met. And you better not ask how long you're going to be there because it was a Southern Baptist church. You can be there until you're done. It was an affinity group. It was an affinity group that because of the food that was eaten there, the language that was spoken, the cadence, the clothes we wore, that's why I dressed the way I wore. People always ask me about how you dress, the hat we wore. Everything about that affinity group in that space was consistent with my cultural background, behavior, and identity. And it felt safe and it was good every Sunday and Wednesday for about 8 hours each time. And everybody else was welcome to it. See, that church was a predominantly Black church in the South. White people could come too. Frankly, they were invited. And if they showed up, they would be hearing some of these spiritual hymns that my family sang for generations. And we hope that they will sing too. And we hope that they would eat the food we were eating. And we hope that they would, I've been trying to get people, even in here, to wear bow ties all my life because that's what we wore. So in this school district, for the folks who are going to be listening and who want to be trolling me like they've been trolling you and I for a decade now, the same people, Stella, been coming for us and haven't seen my humanity just like you heard some tonight. They don't see it. And that's why we keep fighting anyway. You see, no program in the school district excludes young people based on ethnicity or any other reason. And in the school district, we have had affinity groups for generations. Multiple groups have clubs, before and after school classes. They meet, affinity groups. But it's interesting, over the last 3 years we've been doing this one, I get hate mail and death threats. And get sued. When I've said publicly, we do not exclude anybody, but I will say to anybody, come bring your bow tie and come listen to our music, because this is something our young people have led and have developed because they want a safe space and they want other folks to see what that space looks like too. And I would hope that it would be every day. We would have this kind of an event every single day, but it does not happen every day because of the supremacy and the lack of people seeing humanity. And some folks leading with your schools are failing. Because we got to fight that. Sometimes once a year, we want to have a space that's called an affinity group gathering, and we want everybody else to know they can come to. So no, we do not exclude based on identity or race. It's open to everyone. And yes, it is an affinity group. And I will be there Friday. And so will other folks, because it will keep happening. And let me tell you what, if people hear this and they'll know, oh, I can go, and there are hundreds of others who want to join it, just send me the bill for the lunch. You feel me? Because they can come too. Thank you for the opportunity to share, Professor.
That brings us to our next agenda item. It's agenda item 11.1. It's policy 511, the Layman Alternative Community School Enrollment and Admissions for a second reading and adoption. I didn't know that this was going to be on the agenda.
There was some discussion and suggestion, microphone, yes. Some suggestions were brought forward at the LACS site-based council. And I understood that someone was going to forward them to me and that there would be a revision of this policy before it came to the board as a for second reading and adoption. So I am going to suggest that we table this until the meeting on June 28th, because
Or the 11th.
The 11th. Yes, we could do it on the 11th. Yes.
So the idea would be to table this. It would then go to the policy committee on June 4th.
Though I don't know that the policy committee is going to happen on June 4th.
Fantastic.
For a variety of reasons.
Understood.
And so, but I think if I get the suggestions, I can reach out to Lily Talcott, other members of the policy committee. We could incorporate the changes in a new draft, and that could be brought to the board meeting on June 11th.
Any objection from board members to tabling this to the June 11th board meeting? Hearing no objections, it will be tabled until the next meeting. And we will continue on with our agenda, which is agenda item 11.2, budget options. As we proceed for this section, a quick caveat and some framing. It has been pretty widely throughout the community a sentiment that the budget is from our superintendent and or leadership team. And I would like to remind the community humbly that the budget is the budget that is proposed by the school board. One of the main responsibilities of a board of education is the creation and adoption of a budget. Often that means asking administrators for their recommendations for what they think we should do, and keeping that in align with our mission, values, goals, and priorities. And so the conversation that we're going to be having moving forward will be presented by our administrators, but will ultimately be decided by the Board of Education. And so additional questions, conversations, by all means, should be directed to individual board members, to myself at any point in time. We will continue to update the FAQ page. I am also aware that that does not work for everybody, so we'll try to respond to individual messages when and where we can. And please, while this has been a difficult process, some level of humanity, of understanding that we have asked folks to put together a budget in just about a week's time to try to be as thoughtful, to try to keep in line with the programs and the academic excellence that we are trying to strive for. So this is an ongoing conversation. While it is on the agenda for a resolution to adopt a budget this evening, that may in fact may not happen this evening. The board may choose to hold another meeting next week within the timeline that is legally mandated for us to do so. We will let folks know maybe this evening, if not by tomorrow, if that meeting will be on Monday, June 3rd, or pre-scheduled for Tuesday, June 4th. We want to make sure that we have legal clarity, that we are within the anticipated and legally mandated timeline to do so. But this is an opportunity to explore budget options, see where the board does and does not agree, and what we should put forward, and also then allow us some time and opportunity to engage with various stakeholders, representatives, teachers, food service workers, our grounds crew, community members and partners, etc. So we are going to go through this process and as an attempt to try to gain some clarity about what it looks like. And I did say that I will withhold some of my comments from public hearing of delegates, is that while we find ourselves in a difficult situation, there is no doubt that the board continues to have conversations about the last budget and the clear message that was sent that is not lost on anybody. Whether we agree with how we got there or why we got there does not mean that we don't understand where we are. And so we are looking forward. I believe we'll find out momentarily where the board is around what happens next. But at the very beginning, we'll start to explore some budget options. I will also make it known that the board asked for a couple of options to have additional information. And so while the first budget that was discussed at the Finance Committee meeting included a 4.1% budget increase in line with the Consumer Price Index, that was done for information purposes, and we can probably begin there with an understanding that we are most likely going to be looking at a tax cap budget, but I think we should work our way through the process. But knowing that we'll probably end up, and if the board is in agreement at the end of that conversation, we'll determine whether or not we put another budget up for a second vote on June 18th, if I have all that correctly. Board colleagues, is that a sufficient enough context to start the conversation? Fantastic. So I am going to ask Dr. Brown, and I don't know if you're going to have a colleague join you or not, Miss Amanda Verba. our business official. Amanda, as you're coming down, I want to offer public gratitude for the nonstop work that has been done in the development of the first budget, as well as the work that's been done over the past week to you and your team. Thank you for responding to my multiple emails over a holiday weekend. Even while I had my away message on, Amanda was still responding. So I just want folks to know that your work with your team is noticed, is seen, and greatly appreciated. So thank you very much.
I have no words. I thank you. I really am, as you all know, I've been in this community a long time. I graduated college and never left. I'm one of those transplants, so I'm not a local. And I just want to say that I've been really privileged to work with some amazing organizations, Cooperative Extension of Tompkins County, TST BOCES, and Ithaca City School District. And I believe in our students and our staff. I believe in this board. I believe in the work that we do together. And I really am honored to be the person who gets to do this job, even when there are challenges and even when it's difficult and even when people feel that there is trust that is needing to be reevaluated. And so I really thank you all for giving me this opportunity. So thank you for that. And again, I'm glad that you gave credit to all the people that do this, many of whom are in this room, who are working diligently as budget developers, as sounding boards, as communicators. We cannot do this without one another. And I think when things are given to us, we look at them, we really use them to move forward to be better and stronger. So this opportunity for us has given us a growth edge, I think, in terms of looking at really the way that we do the operations here and trying to think creatively about the funding of that. So thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll begin with sort of the we're going to start at the beginning because again, I want to be humble here and say that I think that we'll try to do always a better job each time that we present. So I think one of the things that we want to do is make sure that if you missed a meeting or you weren't at a certain meeting, you get caught up, right? So some of these presentations may be just a tad bit longer because we're going to try to kind of bring information from the meeting prior. So this is the example of one of the things that we shared at the meeting last week. And yes, it is a very, very quick turnaround. And so we want to make sure that, we meet these deadlines. These are not our deadlines. These are state imposed deadlines. We know that people want materials faster and sooner. And unfortunately, we do have laws that we have to follow. And so a lot of times when people feel those frustrations, it's terrible to hear the response, it's not our fault, but the reality is these laws do prescribe this. So this is what a revote timeline looks like for us from a school district. And this would be the same for anybody that would go through a revote in any years prior and any years future. The next thing, and I want to give some credit to, again, our communications team who is able to do some beautiful work, as well as the district clerk and superintendent's office to try to create visuals and easy to follow opportunities. This one was created by our team thinking about the budget priorities. As you're well aware, we had budget priorities that looked like, small class sizes and local elementary schools. We wanted to expand a little bit about that when you're thinking about a deeper level of cut and or reduction or reevaluation or transfer of funds. And so as you can see here, there's some familiar and also newer buckets, right, that I think speak to a lot of the committee work that has been occurring in our district also for a year-long process. And so I don't know if any of my colleagues have anything more to say about that. And Lily, please, yeah, you're more than welcome to join me.
Thanks, Amanda. Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I get to serve as the Deputy Superintendent of the school district. My name's Lily Talcott. So we took a lot of the feedback from our public comment sessions, our budget hearing, information from our board, information from emails, direct conversations, meeting with union leaders, meeting with families, kids, right? And it was clear that the message was we need you to do a few things differently, right? And so we wanted to first put that literacy in mathematics and ensuring that we're teaching those at high levels with high quality curricular instructions is paramount. We also want to protect direct student support, those folks who work directly with young people every day, as much as possible. Class sizes, looking at standardizing those, keeping those around 17 students, K through 5, and similarly at secondary as well, looking at some efficiencies around curricular and extracurricular offerings. We also know that it's really important. We're entering negotiations into some of those direct student support roles, and we're in some of those now. And we heard from our community and from our board, it's really important to make sure, and we absolutely agree, right? In order to compensate those folks in ways that are competitive. We also heard loud and clear, targeted administrative support, right? Fewer positions of administrators. Facility maintenance. We know that there are some things that we just need to delay. And some operational efficiencies around transportation, supplies, and equipment. So pausing on some of those purchases as well. So those are some of the things that we wanted to reflect back that are additional priorities that we heard from this last round. I'm going to pause there because I imagine our board would like to engage in some level of discussion in relationship to these. Perhaps we didn't hear all of them properly, right, or reflect these. So this seemed like a good spot for you all to connect.
Quick question, what does transportation routes mean under the bottom right, operational efficiencies?
Sure. That means that we may be looking at some longer transportation routes, right? Looking at some of our policies around those as well. So, for example, we offer transportation in the cold weather months that exceeds the requirement for small city school districts. For example, we have a couple of shuttles that pick kids up, along the way, along the routes to high school. But then it's also looking at some possibilities around combining routes and becoming more efficient there.
Additional questions or clarifications from board members?
Just while we're looking at this, is it useful to talk about the impacts of the budget we want to pass versus the contingency budget and how that would impact our budget priorities? Is this the time to show both, or is there a different time?
Yeah, we can.
wanna-
We're here to answer any questions you have right now.
23
But
minutes.
that we may not go through. Again, we're here to answer questions that you may have. So if there's a question right now about what a tax cap budget could look like versus a contingency, or what is a contingency budget, we can talk about that. But until we hear which budget the board wants us to focus on, we can just answer those questions.
Can you use the microphone?
Just want to comment on something you haven't heard me speak about yet publicly during these conversations, facility maintenance. For the developers in the room and for the one who's joining the board, what you may not appreciate is we don't respond to the city. We don't respond to the town. This board has one overseer, that's State Education Department. And every year they slap a book on our collective tables, the facilities, folks, the folks who run the facilities committee, Dr. Tripp to my right, has seen the thickness of that packet. Every year they bring us something about that thick, telling us all the things they have reviewed here that we need to fix. And the maintenance was deferred for a long time before Sean and I started. When we started, we had done our first $100 million bond in almost anybody's recollection. $100 million bond sounds like a lot until you break it down to 14 buildings, boilers full of asbestos, entire schools built of asbestos based on the years that they were created, right? We got tiles, we got roofing, we got window, we got pipe jasons, we got you name it. So we asked the public to support our third one, 125 million. 40 million was going to go to rebuild our bus depot. Again, I have nothing but math for you. We got 88 buses and 2 lifts that can lift them up into the sky. In this environment, in this climate, with 150 square miles of transportation needs, do the math. The rest of that money was going to be divided over 10 years, basically $10 million a year. Again, 14 buildings, right? Very, very old buildings. I would just advise this community, whatever you think about this budget, it'd be incredibly irresponsible to allow this district to accumulate that deferred maintenance again going into the future. The roofs don't get better. The boilers don't fix themselves. The asbestos tiles don't remove themselves. Dr. Brown's plans to build STEM labs, those don't come from nowhere. If you don't support it now, just understand this last math fact. You're dealing with $160 billion, you have a lot of cash that is not being productive, shall we say, right? In any moment, we have X amount of cash in the bank. A few years ago, Finance Committee decided to do something constructive with that money. So we met with a company who is by law required to make reasonable investments for public entities. And that company began to return significant savings for us on that cash that was just sitting in the bank until Amanda figured out how to spend it, or someone figured out how to spend it. In recent years, the amount of profit that investment was making was enough to cover the debt service on our bonds. This is complicated. I'm not sure I expect people to understand it. But for folks in this room now and folks who are listening, let me say it again clearly. We asked the community to allow us to create an investment, which is what bonds are. The returns on those investments are going to retirees. They're going to you if you contact your stock expert who has access to investing in those funds. We were not paying $125 million from our budget. We weren't paying for the past $100 million budgets from our budget. This group agreed that 7% was a fair amount to establish a debt service fund moving forward. And from that fund, we would pay principal and interest as it made sense based on the calculations of our experts. Don't know how to say it any clearer. Please don't let this continue much into the future. Roofs don't fix themselves.
Additional board questions?
The question on the table for the contingency, was there a question for us?
Well, I'm looking to my board colleagues
Okay.
first. I'm gonna make a recommendation and look to my board colleagues to either say no or to continue. I think for folks who've had time to digest the last finance committee, we understand that a CPI budget is not tenable at this point in time, and completely understand that. And so maybe the next step would be for us to have a conversation about what a tax cap budget would look like, so we'd be able to engage in a much more robust and specific conversation, not dealing within hypotheticals. Is that agreeable to my board colleagues?
We have good people helping us out.
So fantastic. If that's the way to go, I do see the line through it. That's impressive. So before we talk about a contingency budget, and I will from my understanding, having been down this path in this community on at least 2 other occasions of a conversation of a contingency budget, when we get to that point in time, I will ask folks to pay particular attention to the stipulations and limitations that come along. It is not just around finances, it's additional more than that. But I'm hoping that we can stave off part of that conversation to have this conversation about what a tax cap budget can look like. So Amanda, please feel free to show us what we're looking at.
Great. So there are a number of slides, and I'll do the best I can to be thorough and brief at the same time. And also knowing that there will be follow-up questions. And so this is really about discussion. So the way that we framed it is to sort of put, you know, a lot of energy and effort into both the tax cap and the contingency for the board to be able to have a really true comparative budget. And in fact, the budget that we would have that is within the tax cap is not at the tax cap. It's actually a little bit lower than the tax cap, you know, based on the reductions that we were able to find. You don't want to, you know, just put something back in, but so we really want to make sure that we did a thorough job with that. So those would be the 2 things. We also do want to frame it. It is important for us to be able to give this some framing, because you cannot talk about next year without a true understanding of how 1 year impacts its moment in the history of where we've come from and where we're also going, right? I have said this many, many years. Anyone can do a 1 year only budget. When you get to year 3 and year 5, and you're going into negotiations with the fine people that are in this room, that is not what any school district wants to do, is to create the budget for next year. You do need to have a long range plan. So there will be some slides on that as well. So Lily, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Sure. So again, reflecting back, I saw some nods in relationship to the priorities that we put forward in terms of reflecting back what our community was communicating with us. So you'll see there's a number of reductions, right? That tax cap number is $5.7 million less than what originally went out. So we're looking at targeting administrative efforts by decreasing the costs of labor by 22% in this tax cap budget, establishing a class size minimum that's at or near 17 children per classroom at elementary, and similarly at secondary. That will be an impact on offerings. Reallocating teachers on special assignment back to classroom roles. Again, that aligns with the priority of direct student contact. Pausing on some equipment and supply purchases that we think we can manage for a little while longer. Professional development efforts that are very targeted strictly on literacy, mathematics, and inclusion efforts. And vacancy control. That means that we would pause on filling the vacancies that exist currently. I'll pause and allow the board to discuss.
Questions, board members? Clarifications?
Quick question about the top left rectangle. So a 22% labor cost reduction from what? From this year's?
Yeah.
From the May budget that was voted on, from what?
$158 million budget now.
So this year's budget. Okay, thank you.
And what, I mean, percentage, okay, but we know for tax cap, we have to shave 5.7 million off the budget that was voted down. So what would the 22% of admin reductions get us? And then the rest of these initiatives, what would those potentially get us? Dollar value.
We're going to dig deeper, Erin.
That's later.
Yeah.
Okay.
See, please.
Hi, is it on?
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Sorry, I just had 2 questions. So does reallocating teachers on special assignment mean that a lot of the deans of students that we have at the high school, does that mean that they're not going to be deans anymore? Because they're like teachers on special assignment?
Correct.
Would that just like be for a year and then you'd move them back, or is that gonna be like a permanent thing?
So again, like Ms. Verbo was sharing, we don't engage in, it's not wise to engage in only 1 year budgeting, right? Anyone can create a 1 year budget, but all of the priorities that we mentioned would maintain, right, for approximately 3 years. So those are the priorities that we are reflecting back from the community in order to go forward the next few years.
Okay. My other question is in regards to targeting administrative efforts. Does that mean reducing the number of administrative position within like schools, or are they like office positions? I don't know if this is the right question to ask.
Yeah, it's going to be all levels. And I'm learning that when folks use the term administrator, they're thinking about different people in different levels. They're building-based administrators. There are central office administrators who are directors of certain areas. Then there are executive team members of the superintendent's team. So we're looking to reduce at all levels, each one of those. And to get to 22% of that total administrative cost, that's a significant number of FTE.
It'll make sense when you start.
Yeah, we'll have that later. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, oh, sorry.
I just had a question about the second box on the left. So establishing the 17 student minimum. So would that mean for courses at IHS that have like less than 17 students in them, they would not be offered anymore?
Correct.
Okay.
Or sections would be combined, there are multiple sections.
Yeah.
The pause on filling vacant positions. I mean, we've been talking for several years now about teacher shortages, especially special education. Teacher shortages with teachers that are actually certified. So what does that mean for our teacher shortage situation within the district?
Yeah, I think that's more complicated. It's a really good question, Erin, because there are legal mandates. What you're talking about are meeting individual education plans or IEPs in order to make sure we're providing the services for kids that we're required to do, right?
Right.
So we won't be able to do that with every single vacancy. We have a speech opening and we have to provide speech services for a young person. We are still very likely going to fill that. If it is not mandated, we're looking at it and likely not filling it. Does that help?
Yep. Okay. Thank you.
I want to be clear.
We can keep asking questions, and a reminder that we're going to continue to get into the data, but please feel free, Lucy.
Sure.
No, sir, feel free.
Follow-up question to the second box. So does that mean that necessarily every single class with less than 17 students will be cut? Because a lot of the world language classes, especially as you move higher up, end up being like 10 kids to 3 in the most extreme cases. So does that mean that those classes are no longer going to be offered?
That's possible. There's also possibilities around the independent study policy that's moving forward.
Okay, thanks.
And a reminder to folks, we are exploring what's being proposed, and we will continue to have conversations. So this is us to explore how we get to a tax cap, but possible ways to get to a tax cap budget. I just want to make sure we continue to say that. So let's continue and see how more questions are generated, and continue to feel free to ask questions, please, good folks.
So I think in particular, there are some questions around what would the implications be of, say, especially that first box, right? I saw some, wow, right? Reduction in 22% of labor costs in administrators. What does that mean? Certainly responsiveness is going to be impacted. Our communication protocol likely won't be 3 days anymore. It would likely be much longer than that, just given the number of humans in order to handle some of those questions or requests. There would certainly be fewer people to handle some of the behavior management requests that folks may have, likely increased suspension rates. You know, if we're thinking about folks, if they're if young people are struggling to meet the behavioral expectations in a particular space and someone asks for additional support, there may not be as much additional support. And we may be looking at, again, because of the number of people to handle some of the situations, the likelihood that suspension or other punitive consequences might take place is more likely, right? Vacancies will stay open longer, and there will be, there's less professional development, right? Fewer opportunities to make additional money outside of the school day. So those are some of honestly, that first box, some of the implications in relationship to that. Questions about that?
So can we go back to that last slide? So I imagine the lower right-hand side, or at least on my screen, would be, is that an idea about less clubs and advising roles, or what is that part mean?
Potentially, right? There would likely be some impact on extracurricular offerings or extended day offerings. There would also, because we're focusing our professional development efforts, there will be fewer administrators and teachers on special assignments to deliver those, that there would be fewer opportunities.
Okay, let's continue.
So I also want to be clear, because we're about to get a lot more specific shortly. We're not going to talk about individual line items because the individuals may be identifiable. And once the board identifies a budget, we will absolutely meet with employees and have respectful, caring conversations about their positions and what their future may be. So you're going to see a level of specificity that may not quench your thirst for specificity at the moment publicly. And I want to be super clear about that. And it's truly coming from a place of caring about human beings and not wanting them to find out stuff on a board meeting. Okay? Okay, great.
This slide, I'll just go very quickly. I just want to make sure that although maybe folks haven't yet found it on the website, or if you were searching for it and you were unsuccessful because that search tool didn't lead you where you needed to be, we do have a lot of the information around why we do long-range plans and long-range plans for funds, whether they're short-term funds, federal funds, state funds. Our audit reports are all there. And so we will always get better at that as well. And so one of the things, though, that we do need to, again, stress is that we need to have this vision, the management, and the sustainability of efforts. The questions are already coming up. Is this a one-year only thing, or is it a long-term thing? There will be slides to show you the impact, right? When you reduce revenue, there is long-term impact, specifically around the levy, which you just have to have a strategic plan for, and you just have to make sure that you manage forward for that. Also, the long-range plan must include your metrics around enrollment projections. So, there's a lot of conversation about enrollment where we have been, and there have been decreases to Ithaca. And then we also do track what's coming. Our staffing needs, right? We do respond to things like a global pandemic, and then what we need to do differently, as well as meet our vision and mission and our goals, and then also analyze our revenue sources. So let's start with quickly in enrollment projections. I know that this slide is very familiar for many, but we also did add our Tompkins County live birth data. So then that way you could see moving forward that line over to the far right ends in 2029. And then so that's sort of our enrollment trend K through 12 that we anticipate as they're coming in to our district. So, again, choices that we make today, which is on that 2024-25, you just want to make sure you're prepared for the trends that are coming our way. Also, to the blue line on the left and the orange line on the left, those are, although the population that we currently have, because that ends through 2023, has decreased slightly in those last couple of years. the needs of students have increased, right? The top blue line is that economic status, kids that need more resources because they do not have them at home. And then students who are with IEPs and disabilities. So that's 40% for the economic status and 18% for the students with disabilities. We also, this is a familiar graph as well for folks on the staffing needs, right? That alligator mouth where you all of a sudden saw the blue line cross with the orange line shows the change in enrollment and the number of change in, this is just teacher FTE. So this is the all categories that would fall under the ITA. And that was directly in response to COVID. And most of them are in special education. They are, we look at the numbers and we've shared this before. It's special education teachers, it's school psychologists, it's school social workers, and enhancements and guidance, those sorts of things. So that is, again, a chart that we have shared on a number of meetings. And that is based on our enrollment info and then our teacher FTE that's in the Beds Day data on October 15th. The next slide is
Just a note on that one,
so sorry.
Amanda.
Mhm.
Just, I think for those looking at it
Sure,
carefully,
there you
pay attention to the y-axis, right? The scale of the y-axis. This is not negative 100% to positive 100%, right? It's quite
Sure.
zoomed in. And a quick question, Trisha, are you able to post this on board docs? Because we're only seeing it here and we can't read the keys.
Yep.
To the graphs.
Yes, and I'm sorry that this one is small. This one actually, we can blow this up for you. That's not a problem at all. We can get that for you larger.
Okay. Even if it's just posted to board docs.
Yep.
or-
We're getting it.
And this also goes, all of this will go on the FAQs as well.
Awesome.
Okay, great. And again, so just speaking of the staffing, I know that there was a lot of conversation about, I want to make sure that, you know, whatever funding that we have goes to teaching. This just shows you over the course of time, and I'm sorry this stops in 2022, but that's, if you could see, this is Frontline Analytics. This is one of the companies that takes statewide data from budgets. They look at specific budget lines. They look at increases and decreases. And this shows that over the course of time, we do allocate our funding, most of our funding increases to the teaching regular school, that teaching regular school staff. So that's in our 2110 and 2250 lines, which is our instructional lines. So you'll see that the largest amount, although maybe not by percentage, the dollar amounts over time definitely outpace everything else. It is bookended by our benefits packages and our state retirement packages. I don't know if you noticed that as well. Okay. So that's that staffing piece of the sort of the cog in the wheel, right? And then the next one is looking at our revenue sources. And so it's really important for us to always track not just our local tax levies, but also the state taxes that folks pay that then get returned to districts all across the state, of which Ithaca is a recipient. We have been pretty steady, as you can see in those middle years. We did get a bump that was due to the COVID increases that was incorporated into our state funding lines. And now that is going back down again. And I think you're all getting the clips from your own associations about how that trend is most likely going to remain flat or even go down. So that reliance away from the state aid lines will actually go more toward shift toward the local levies, right? So that's happening as well. So we keep a track on that. The next thing I just want to say, this is non-salary, and then we'll get into salary, okay? So this is regardless of the budgets that we choose. These are the sort of the levers, if you will, around some of the buckets that are non-salary related. Our BOCES programs, our retirement and benefits, those two middle boxes on the right and then in the middle, those are the largest drivers. That M is $1 million, right? The others are in thousands, and you can see we've decreased things, right? So just so you can see, a lever can go both ways, both increases and decreases. That tuition rate is up because we found that in the special education budget, a lot of the student placements were not being funded properly in the general fund. And so we were going over budget year after year. And so that is a correction to that budget line. So that's why those tuition rates have gone up. And also to the cost per student goes up every year, depending on specifically the charter schools and things. So just so you know that that's sort of those budget factors that are non-salary related.
So
Sure.
if I'm reading this in these boxes, if there's not a negative sign, that means these are the increases in expenditures from this current year to the proposed year. Is that
Correct.
what I'm seeing? So BOCES budget from ICSD will increase by 1.89 million.
Correct. So that means that we need that much more revenue, right? So this is not the total budget amount because that is in the
Understood.
line by line, the budget document. This is the total amount of change that we need from the current year that we're in right now to next year. Now, some of these, we can try to, take funds from them or reduce those funds. So for example, as staff, if we minimize the number of staff, the retirement and benefits would go down.
Sure.
Right? We can do a calculation and try to chip away at that. If we have fewer bus routes, the transportation services lines might go down. This is not salary though. This is like, gasoline and tires and chains and, oil and all those things, right, that we need. So just so you know, that's the sort of piece. As you can see here, there's really not, the two big pieces are retirement and benefits and BOCES. All the others, we've really tried to be stewards of year to year. And you've heard that if you've watched the finance committee meetings, all of our budget developers have been really cognizant of their year to year increases and even tried to give us some decreases, but that needle still moves. So just so you know, these are those things that have to be funded.
I'd also just remind the public as well, each component district within our Board of Cooperative Education Services. So each of the 9, their boards vote on the budget to accept it within their component district. So our board adopted that budget already. So that is not something we can touch. And then retirements and benefits, again, similar to what Amanda shared, unless we shift that number of belly buttons, as folks say, that number stays the same because of what we have contractually agreed to give people.
Okay, so we're going to now shift into 2 different slides sets. The first in purple, everything that's in purple is the budget revote. Okay, so this is within the tax cap, and in fact, it's under the tax cap. It's a revote number that would require a 50% voter approval. It is a levy amount that is less than the tax cap levy. So instead of, I think our tax cap levy is 111,052,486 with a 3.099% increase allowable by law from one year to the next. This is just slightly below that. And it's at 2.92 with a levy amount of 110,862,167. The total budget amount increase from one year to the next would be 2.79. Over on the side, you'll see sort of that levy that sort of keeps us just moving forward with the levy increase from year to year to hopefully compensate for the loss in state aid. And then also the tax rate, this would cause a decrease in the tax rate. So again, if you remember, the original budget that we proposed in May had a tax rate of estimated about 16.22. This one is estimated at 14.90, which is a 8.11% decrease. And again, this is an estimate because we do not receive total assessed value numbers from the assessor's office until August. So we don't know about all of the properties that are not on the rolls. We don't know what the folks that are homeowners or property owners that challenge their assessments, where those landed. So that has to all work itself out, and then we'll find that out in August. So this is the first budget option that we would propose for consideration to the Board of Education, and we'll get into some specifics now about what that means for the staffing, right? So I told you already the non-staffing pieces, these are the staffing projections, I will say, that these are again estimates, they're not actuals right now. And again, as a reminder of what Lily said, we will not be discussing specific roles or specific names of people, but the yellow bar is the adopted budget from the prior year. So the year that we have already closed, that is the year that everything that you see in terms of the per pupil accounts, right, were calculated off of all the discussion about per pupil amounts. That's the 2023 budget, because that's the only year that is expended. You get to compare it to what the original budget amount was. You get to know what your actual operational costs were, and then you get to calculate everything that goes into all of those portals. So the fiscal year 2023, we included as sort of that's a closed year. It is an expended year. The 2024 year in that orangey red is the year that we're right now living in. We don't have expenditure reports for this year because we're not finished yet. We don't know what the per pupil will be because we haven't finished yet, right? So our fiscal year ends June 30th. So this is the staffing that was adopted in that budget. This does include vacancies because a budget includes positions anticipating for all the different movements that you might make. So for example, there's many more TAs and aides than you might fill that are budgeted, right? But an expenditure report would actually show you what those were. And this is again, budget to budget to budget. The gray was the initial budget that was proposed in May that went down. And then that purple bar, again, keeping with the theme of the dark purple, right? This is the budget that we would actually be part of this revote budget. So you will see the first three groupings: executive team, managerial confidential, and Ithaca principals and directors, that we would consider as leadership of this district and defined typically by law as administrative positions. There is a lot of information out there, including EA, which is Employees Association. They are not administrative positions. They help administrators do our work. They do the clerical work. They help us, they feed our students, they drive our students, they clean our buildings. They are in and around the buildings doing the maintenance and grounds. We would argue that they are also student facing. And they also matter and impact young people every day. So they are not administrators, they are service providers, just like our teachers and just like our ESPs and just like our teaching force. The next is substitutes. The next ESP stands for Educational Support Professionals. Those are aides and TAs. And then the next group is ITA, which is the Ithaca Teachers Association. Again, I want to just drill a little bit deeper, if you don't mind. I'm just going to go to the next slide to sort of take away a lot of the volume here on this one and the noise on this one, and just specifically look at the current fiscal year that we're living in, going to the proposed revote. Again, that purple. This just cleans up that graph, but I know people like historical data, and they also wanted a comparative to what we proposed in May. That former slide is valuable, but this is really what we're talking about now. You're building a brand new budget. You're building a brand new budget from the current year you're living in to the revote budget. And under this tax cap budget, this is what it would look like as estimations. That purple box there talks a little bit about how we'll get there through retirements, through unfilled or open positions, through attrition. And we gave an example of the ITA because we always know that we want to make sure that we speak to the value of our teachers front and center with our students. We do not disagree. And also every year, just through attrition, teachers do move on to other opportunities, whether their partner finished up their graduate program at Cornell and they move on, they go closer to home, they retire. And I hope they're having a fabulous life while doing that. So
that would be someone like my mother, retired from the district in 2004. And to clarify, I typed this, the 5-year average of retirements in ITA is 58.2 positions per year. It's actually retirements and resignations. So that's looking at all over the last 5 years, pulling both of those, identifying the averages over those 5 years and then identifying the number of full-time equivalencies or the positions themselves. So you can see, you know, we're talking about things that it's very likely that we're not outpacing that, right? What we're suggesting is not going to be in excess of that by any means.
Before,
So
if we
quick
are to post
question.
this, can we make sure that we make that correction, please?
Yes.
So.
Quick
if I-
question while we're.
Go ahead. Yep.
Go ahead, Joe.
So Lily, I think what you're saying here, I want to play it back to you,
I like
is
it.
that
Do it.
with the likely retirements and resignations, we don't anticipate teacher personnel being cut in the teacher line. We expect that there will be fewer teaching positions, but that we hope not to be cutting specific teachers.
That's precisely correct.
Thank you.
And certifications always come into play and can throw us curveballs. So I also want to be honest about that.
And-
One other thing too, just, I do want to be very clear. Remember, we build a budget with fund balance funded positions that are not filled, right? So we put in extra staff in places. This is cutting into that, right? So there will not be the, that support net that we have in budgeted lines. So if staff come forward and say, I need this, we're gonna unfortunately have to say no, because it will not be budgeted under those circumstances. We're gonna try to catch all of that extra, right? All of that sort of like the unfilled things first, right? To do no harm to our colleagues.
So Eldred, I know you have a question and so does Moira as well. I just want to know that, or note that in years prior, we would have something that we would essentially call, doesn't mean this is the accurate term, sort of a teacher reserve bank of FTEs. And what you're saying that is not what we're going to be doing moving forward.
We actually we've always had a teacher in reserve bank. We will not be having that anymore.
For the proposed budget currently.
It just for the proposed budget as well as a contingency budget, that would not be in existence in both of those scenarios.
Thank you. Yep. Eldred or Moira?
I'm just kind of curious, how do you even budget for subs? Anticipate how many subs?
Well, we look back at all the records, right? So we know what our per diem sub numbers are, and we also know what our building level subs are. We know the utilization of them. And in fact, that got a lot of conversation as well. The substitute lines, it looked like that was a massive increase, and it was, because there is a brand new model of building subs in addition to the per diem subs. We're using a both and, right? So there are building subs that show up to the same building every day, the 180 days. And then there's also the per diem subs for to cover when people go out and do PD, because the need is that great post-COVID.
So the reduction that you're showing here, would that be building subs?
Yes, most likely.
Eldred?
So another elephant in the room is the proposal that was planned to be on the table for a raise for teachers. So here's a question: how do you fund the millions of dollars it would cost to increase the salary beyond marginally for 600 teaching professionals with flat state aid or aid that might go down, and this tax cap budget proposal?
That'll be part of the long-range planning process, Eldred.
Which means there will be no increases in salary for this year.
That's not, well, first of
It'll
all,
be part of the long-range planning process.
Right.
What you do, we don't know what budget will be adopted yet. We don't know, right, what the numbers will look like for next year. So I couldn't even begin to discuss the long-range plan until we know the direction that we would be taking. And then we would have to go from there. And we have We have a lot of experience with building the metrics around the different scenarios, as we've all seen. And we do that together when planning for all bargain units. And I do want to say that I know you're talking future. We are in negotiations with two groups right now. We don't want to forget that, both ESP, the TAs and aides, as well as the substitutes.
And contractually obligated for the remainder of the contracts that are already in their existence. So there is a raise already currently set for.
Absolutely. Right. And regardless of the budget, whether it's this within the tax cap or the contingency budget, that is by law, right? We are contractually obligated to give those salary increases. Under a contingency budget, the only group that does not get salary increases are managerial confidential, because they have terms and conditions, and that is actually part of a contingent budget. You cannot give them a salary increase under a contingent budget.
I think I understood all that pretty well. I was asking specifically under the auspices of what we are talking about now, a 2.9% budget increase. Will there be room to increase the teachers' salaries above and beyond what is contractually obligated?
I want to say I appreciate the question. I don't think that's a question that we can answer at this time. I get the question. I understand it. I think that is, again, part of long-term planning and conversation with other folks in other spaces to begin with, and then to come back to that question. But you are raising that. It presents difficulty, and a difficulty we're gonna have to work
Because
through.
I got 200 messages in my inbox saying, down with so-and-so, we want the teachers to have raises.
Understood. Understood.
So we have two more slides in this section. I just want to let everybody know, and then we have the contingency slides, but I'm happy, we can keep taking questions.
Quick question about that 58.2 number. Do those retirements and resignations usually happen fairly uniformly across grade levels? Just thinking they don't.
I would be remiss to even speculate. I just asked for raw numbers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sean,
No, I'm more saying it's similar to what Lily's saying, is that it's difficult to make those projections. It probably changes, there's probably a couple of bimodal years. There's probably some other things that have taken place. And part of the reason why I really appreciate saying that we're not going to get into the specifics in the moment, even though we can begin to talk about FTEs and amount, that significant changes also happen throughout the summer as well. And so those are ongoing conversations that would need to be happening to make sure that we're providing as much support and personnel as we possibly can to meet the needs of our students. It's not going to be a perfect science. And for folks who are going to be looking at who we may ask, who are we going to be asking to look at another budget? Some of the questions may not get answered. We're trying to provide as much information as we possibly can at this point in time. about what would change, and then we can come back and have a talk about the numbers if the board members choose. Is that, any objections to that?
The legal side.
Sure. Should we pop in? We'll skip ahead to that one. There are some numbers that you'll see have been populated there. So a contingency budget requires certain things through New York State education law. Buildings can only be used for instructional purposes. That means things that happen after school or before school with outside groups, et cetera, no longer take place. The administration budget has to be the same or less as a percent of the previous year's budget. There can be no new contracts entered into or negotiated at all. The keys to the overall functioning of the school district are to, the idea is to preserve, operate, and maintain school buildings and mandated educational programs. We can't get student supplies, no equipment. We have to focus on the health and safety of folks. Reductions in transportation, performing arts, extracurriculars, athletics, class sizes go up, and the board can take a look and make determinations regarding what the state calls ordinary contingent expenses.
Two questions. Is that okay? So after school programs would be cut in that case?
So it just means we can't allow, a school district isn't allowed to permit outside groups to use their grounds or their buildings after school. So there are a number of outside organizations that utilize our school buildings for after school programs that aren't run by the Ithaca City School District, but they're run by outside organizations that are governed by OCFS.
So they couldn't happen in the school.
Correct.
And does this also includes PTA events? Is that? I'm thinking all the things that happen in our schools if we were to go to contingency budget. So PTA events, Ithaca Youth Bureau basketball tournaments and games, like what are we talking about here?
No, so what that, it really is the bell rings. School happens, the bell rings.
Done.
That's a contingency budget under the law. The only way that we could even allow or even consider, and when I say we, I mean the Board of Education, it has to be fully reimbursed cost. So it has to be every single dollar that you would think to keep the lights on, to have a custodian, to all of the things, the full cost of it. And you would have to vote as a board to allow for that, because that would be outside of the law. You would say that that is something that you would allow to happen, but we must be reimbursed for every dollar that it would cost us to open our buildings from before the bell rings to after the bell rings. That includes weekends.
And that would include, so I'm thinking about clubs that are middle schools and high schools. That would that include after school clubs?
So sports, fine and performing arts, and extracurriculars are considered to be part of the educational program, but under a contingency budget, we would have to evaluate those as a group, right? We would give you all the information. The board would determine of those groups. If we're exceeding the amount of the budget for the program budget, we would have to look at prioritizing those.
Okay. And when it says no outside usage of buildings and grounds by any groups, does that include like kids using playgrounds or people using tennis courts or?
So we couldn't turn the lights on. You couldn't turn the lights on, right? But I mean, like we wouldn't, the playgrounds are open, those are open facilities, but we would not be having, them, we would not be having them like welcoming public events, And again, this is all prescribed by law. So we tried to capture the essence. we wanted to put that one on there because we know that one, our buildings are our community centers. And so this is something that must just, beyond staffing, talking about staffing, this is a community impact that has to be discussed. And it's not for any reason, but just inform people, because they just have to know that that is something that they would have to start planning now. Right, if a contingency budget were adopted to be able to have those spaces for next year.
What about pre-K?
Well, it's not mandated. It's not mandated. And so again, you would have to evaluate if that would remain in the budget. That we do get federal dollars and we do get like Head Start dollars and things for that, but you would have to evaluate beyond those funds what you would want to continue to do. So it's not a requirement or mandated by law.
Okay, and sorry, one more and then I'll.
Yeah,
I'm thinking project innovation, right? But
Not
outside of
required,
the
but-
ESY, so, but would ESY for students who have it in the IEP would be included, but project innovation gone? Is that,
We would
BOCES, I
very
think.
likely
Part of the
utilize
BOCES
BOCES
Yeah.
again.
okay, thank
For
you.
students who need those services for 12-month IEPs.
When contracts can't get negotiated, does that mean salaries would stay consistent? Or like what happens if you can't negotiate a contract?
No, so what happens in terms, the language of contracts is not bargained agreements, right? So your bargain agreements by law, you must meet the obligations of your bargained agreements. And yes, you can enter into negotiations with a group, but obviously to Eldred's point, just by the revenue that's coming in, there would have to be a real education of the groups there of what actually is available during that time. Contracts for this would be like, for example, if we enter into every year a general maintenance contract, right, to repair our elevators. If we know that it's not a health and safety risk, and we can say, you know what, we can go a year and not enter into that contract, that's what we're talking about. Contracts for professional development, contracts for, agencies that use our buildings. We could not enter into those. You actually have to put a hard stop. Ice time, right? We'd have to evaluate. We definitely have to work with athletics because there's a lot of contracts around some of the sports that they have. We would not be able to enter into any of those new contracts unless, again, you determined that that was an essential part of the program and the board would vote that as something that we would then give funds towards.
Two additional questions. When you say additional increase to class size, how big are we talking here? Is there a state cap or?
No, there's no state cap. New York City recently put out some recommendations, but there's no state requirement that exists.
So what could you foresee being a K-5 average class size and in contingency budget?
That's unclear, but we're looking at an additional about $4 million of reductions. So pretty significant, probably.
And then we're looking, when you say decrease in extracurricular and all of that, and we're talking about facilities outside of school hours, would we be able to even host sporting events, track meets, football games?
I actually was going to say we'd probably be more likely to host them than we would to be able to travel to them.
So that was just a quick conversation about the contingency budget. I am certain that we'll engage in more conversation. Again, unless there's objections from the board, I'd like to move us back to a tax cap budget to see what questions remain, to make sure folks can have all their questions in preparation for whatever the board may decide to do next. And so I don't know if there are additional questions let me rephrase that. And I'm going to stop calling it a tax cap budget because we are talking about being below the tax cap.
I would call it a revote budget.
A revote budget. Thank you very much. And if I'm not, the percentage was 2.79. Is that what I should know it at this point in time? I apologize.
And before your minds go right there, I just have a really quick question about the contingency budget, that the actual budget amount is calculated how? There are state provided calculations that are handed to us that end up determining that final number. Yes.
Oh, sorry.
Katie, that's correct. Yes. So these are the parameters, right? These are the parameters. You cannot levy more than you levied the year prior. So our levy amount, right, that 107 million, that would be the levy amount. And then you have to eliminate all equipment purchases, you decrease your capital, right? And your administrative budget. So it's not just administrators, but it's all things that make up the administrative budget on that 3-part budget, administrative program capital. That also has a percentage that that drives that column. Your capital is reduced, your administrative is produced, and then the remaining goes to program, right? But you have to have a capital budget because you have to maintain, it is mandatory by law to maintain the health and safety. So essentially what you do with a capital budget is you take out those equipment purchases, and then all the general maintenance to your staff stays there, because you still have to clean your buildings, you still have to repair your stuff, you have to do all of those things, mow your lawn, all of that. You've got to serve food to kids, you've got to answer phones, you've got to be responsive, you got to transport kids on buses, right? So that is where, and again, again, there's no scare tactic whatsoever. What does get hit in a contingency budget is the program budget, right? Administrative will go down a bit, capital goes down, but it's not people, it is the program. And we have to determine what that would look like. That's what the board would do.
Thank you.
Additional board questions, comments, reactions?
As I understand this option for the under the tax cap revote option, and what I've heard so far, it meets what I was looking for, and it meets my understanding of what many of our public correspondents have been looking for. So I'll just say, to be brief, that I would support the revote budget option of under the tax cap.
Any additional board comments, reactions, questions?
I would just say that I feel similarly to Jill, and I also, while I feel strongly about fiscal responsibility, I'm grateful for all of the work that's gone in. And I also feel alarmed by some of the realities that we would face with a contingency budget, and would just state strongly that that is not something that I would support as a board member or want for my children.
I will echo Katie's sentiments. I
Me
would
too.
feel alarmed as a community member, well outside of my board role. If we are at a contingency budget, I understand the long-term impact for probably a generation of students. Just as someone who's been in this role and watching how we've been trying to plan. And so while this is not a budget that I want, it is an absolute budget that I can support. Again, with some additional questions and conversations, some dialogue with some stakeholders. I know that this is not, let me take this and let's run with it. It's thank you for the work. Thank you for presenting us something to get our minds around. What does this mean? And as one board member, I feel an obligation to the community to go back out for a revote and let the community decide if this is where we need to be at this moment, at this time. So I also, again, want to reiterate thanks for, in less than a week, pulling together this amount of information. And I know that the conversations are not ended. Please hear me when I say that there are other conversations to be had, but I would be able to support going back out for a revote with what you presented, barring any additional pieces of information that come to light over the next little bit. Moira.
Agreed with everything you just said.
Derek.
Also agreed.
I agree. And let me just be frank, since my name seems to be Frank this evening. Contingency budget, a contingency budget decimates this school district. It will no longer be the district that you remember as a student, or that these kids who are sitting there tonight will be able to recall. Then let me tell you what you'll be faced with. Assessments that are going to continue to rise. as you saw even on the contingency budget. They're going to go up and up and up and up because our community is changing. And then the quality of your schools will be decimated. And when people come here, they'll be reluctant to come because what's the first thing people look at when they look at Zillow? Right? So you have high assessments, you have high taxes, your property value actually might begin to decrease because the schools are no longer the same. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, and I'm not projecting the future. I'm a student of history. We've seen this play out in this country over and over and over and over.
So in terms of a process moving forward, I don't know that the board needs to take an action. Actually, I would recommend that we not take an action this evening. But I would recommend that we would give our administrators some idea of a direction that we think we're headed. From the quick, for lack of a better word, straw poll, it seemed like most folks are thankful, first and foremost, for the work. And let's try to proceed with what was presented, to have some conversations, and then set up a second budget meeting or district meeting, school, I'll find the words at some point in time, school board meeting, again, either to be between Tuesday's committee meetings or on Monday as a special meeting, and recognizing that in the conversation that not everyone may be able to join us, at least in public or in person, but some may be able to join us virtually. I'm looking at my board members' direction, thoughts. Is that an idea? So we should put something out together about which of those 2 days, work with Amanda. If there is a better day that would help your team, realize.
We'll always take an extra day, Sean. Please.
Understood,
Thank you.
understood. And I want that. I understand that as well. In fact, the long hours may do some other things to work-life balance, right? And then the idea being, when the board votes, that only begins more work for you and your team to make sure that all the legal documents and the legal notices are fact-checked, accurate, and ready to be voted upon. And so I will say preliminary to the community, not confirmed, because we'll work with our board clerk, but we'll try to anticipate a meeting on Monday, June 3rd, if I'm not mistaken. We will find the time. If I'm not mistaken, I think the time discussed was possibly 6 p.m.
Yep.
If it could go earlier than that, we'll let folks know. But that's sort of the idea. And we hopefully at that point in time would be ready to vote on any legal steps that the board would need to take to put this in front of our community at that time.
No executive session.
That would be a different situation, but we wouldn't need people to join us for an executive session if the board so chose, right? So quick, I don't want to, obviously, I'm not trying to overstep. I'm trying to give us a direction to move down the path.
Yeah, that makes sense. That seems.
All right, and I will follow up with Karen, but seeing as we have enough board members here, I'm hoping Karen could join us, but I'll follow up with that as well. And so does that seem to give at least some direction to where the board is headed? And I don't know if you have additional questions for us. This is always an unfair exchange. Fantastic. We will follow up again, greatly appreciated for difficult work in a difficult time. There is always more. There are 2 additional resolutions. There are 3.
First. But that one we would table, right? And that's. It does have to be good.
And what does that mean in terms of the legal notice? That just that we're having a vote?
Yeah, it's twice for the date. And so what we typically have in the notice is notification that there will be a vote on proposition 1, which is the budget to be determined, and then any of the following propositions that may be on.
So that means we potentially have another hour-long conversation about a proposition 2. Or the board decides that that is not the path that they want to go down at this point in time.
Is there no proposition?
I'm sad to say I don't say no to Proposition 2, but I can count the votes. I think there's a real confounding factor that happened with the vote. And I think a lot of people voted no on everything who would have been very happy to vote for the electric buses.
And
Es-
I agree. Sorry,
Espe- Yeah, especially when the information that we've been provided is that the cost of those buses is essentially the same as our traditional gas or diesel buses when we take into account the rebates and special incentives that have been shown to us. So I'm very reluctant to get rid of Proposition 2.
Yeah, I agree with Jill. Now, as we talked about before, I would be open to modifying it, but of course, this would take a very long time. But, you know, on principle, I think that to not move forward on replacing buses, which we need to do, and putting any replacement of any vehicles off for another year is not responsible. And that we would be doing it because I think a significant number of people didn't fully understand what the funding was for the proposition, or especially what the funding was for the proposition.
So I think to Moira, to your point, not that anyone wants to be here any longer, but if we're even going to consider this, I think it'd be important to explain, and maybe Amanda could come back, that this is coming out of money we already have. Maybe that will help.
Right. Part of what would be is voting on the authorization to spend money that was currently in the budget, not to find the revenue for this money. I also am much more in favor of putting a modified version of Proposition 2, as well as a conversation, which we've communicated in different ways, but not in a central location, about the significant number of rebates and grants that would help support the purchase of particularly electric buses that may not be there next year. But it does raise a number of questions about where we find ourselves. And so I hear about sort of counting votes, and I appreciate that. And I don't know where that leaves us. And maybe there is an idea, or maybe there is a motion either to include or not include, and we find a way, and then we take it from there. Again, recognizing that we are down one board member. So board colleagues, I'm looking to you for some suggestions, some advice,
Karen.
best way to proceed that folks may feel.
I mean, I guess my worry is that a continued inclusion of Proposition 2 as it goes forward to voters would risk a conflation of a perception that we were not responsive, that the budget is the same, that we're still pushing something that is irresponsible. Not that that's necessarily how I feel, but there might be a conflation. And that's a risk that I'm weighing.
I would say I share that concern, and maybe I feel like the timing isn't right to ask for anything more than the 2.9% increase. I could see arguments for both sides, but I think I'm more on the side of doing without, but we could take a vote, of course.
Regrettably, I'm with Katie on this too.
Can I ask, I mean, maybe this is something I should know already, but are we required to replace a certain number of buses annually?
It's just good practice.
It's good practice, but
There's a replacement schedule, and if you don't replace buses on a regular basis, you end up with a
higher
big problem the
incidences
next year and the next year and the next year, as well as more repairs,
More
more
maintenance.
breakdowns.
We would have to play, the board at some point in time would have to play catch up. That's just the reality of the life cycle of the buses. And we can do that, but I want folks to know that going in, that that's what we'd be talking about. Right now, if I'm not mistaken, we have capacity for 8 electric buses. Is that correct? And with that being said, and if I heard Elbert give a number before, how many buses are in the fleet? I want to say 88 or 87.
88.
Right, so we're still talking about less than 10% of the entire bus fleet that would be electrified. And I don't know if this language is, I didn't check, compare numbers. Is this the exact same proposition that was on the last vote that we had? So it's the exact same. So I would actually be a little bit more inclined to modify this, but still keep us so that the playing catch up isn't such a large task. So maybe it's 2 electric buses and 2 low emission propane vehicles and then finding some other way, but to go for a total of 8 buses over the next couple of years where you'd have to make that up would make me worried about the financial impact that at some point in time is gonna we're gonna have to do more to what Jill's point was about maintenance and about the lifespan of buses. But and again, I say it all the time, with that being said, that's the beauty of a board, that we have multiple perspectives. Moira?
I have a question about the ultra low emission propane buses. Are these full size buses? Yes. What is the cost of them compared to an electric bus with readers? First slide is
We anticipate.
Three. There's going to be a slide up soon. We'll have the numbers on. It's the final slide of Amanda's deck. And you'll see on the left-hand side, the left and the right, when you see them, are not in competition. The left is two buses that have wheelchair lifts on them. They're 66 capacity, student capacity with wheelchair lifts, okay? And it'll show electric. You'll see no cost there because electric is not what we would look for in a wheelchair bus. Then you'll see propane and gas and diesel. Gas and diesel are essentially the same cost. And you'll notice that the difference between propane and gas diesel is roughly $8,000. So there you go. And we are requesting 2 of those. Because the current fleet of wheelchair capacity buses, wheelchair lift buses is really old, and we will make it work if that's the board's desire, but there will be, additional cost to those, and eventually they just will not be able to be fixed. So that's on the left-hand side. Now, the right-hand side would be the remainder under the budget that went down. We asked for 8 buses. So there'd be 6 70-passenger buses. Again, 4 of them were slated to be electric. The cost per bus before rebates and grants is $476,000. We get that down to close, about $10,000 more than the ultra low emission propane. So that's for the board to chew on, I guess. And then, the remaining would be 2 ultra low emission propane. We are not asking for diesel or gas because at, again, roughly $8,000 difference, we do feel that the impact on the environment and the emission standards, that the ultra low emission propane is the way to go. Additionally, with ultra low emission propane, it burns so efficiently that the oil that lubricates the engines lasts longer. The mechanics are like, when we dump that out, it's amazing how it holds up. So that's what it looks like with 8 buses. And we can do any combination. I would ask, though, that we pay particular attention to the wheelchair lift buses.
Comments, reactions, questions, board members?
Why are we paying particular attention to the wheelchair lift buses?
Those are the current wheelchair buses that we have are really in need of some replacements.
So the difference between the cost of with the rebates of an electric bus versus an ultra low emission propane bus is roughly
Roughly 10 to 12, depending on the
10 or
grant and
12,000.
rebate and yeah.
And we have these, we have these rebates or grants in hand, or
No, and I think we mentioned before, if for some reason we don't get the rebates or grants, if they start to go away, which we don't anticipate, but if they do, we're not going to spend 476,000 on an electric bus. We'll just simply not do that.
One more question. So the passenger vehicles, do we buy electric passenger vehicles?
We're looking at hybrids for those right now with the needs that we have
But
for
we don't
those.
specify. And in
No,
fact,
that would remain the same. The language around that, unless the board was like, no, stop that cycle of replacement on those type of vehicles.
So board colleagues, because this is a proposition to authorize payment, not to collect additional funds, one idea, one possible proposition would be to cut Prop 2 in half, to be 2 electric buses with wheelchair lifts, 2 ultra-low propane buses, and then 3 passenger buses. So we can demonstrate that we are hearing what the community has said, but it doesn't take us all the way to try again to continue to try to catch up on a fleet that we know that we've been on roughly a 10-year cycle. It would also allow us the opportunity, as folks were saying to me in various spaces and online, to take this a little slower, which partly I understand, not knowing what's going to happen with the mandate that doesn't come to full fruition until 2035. So that's just something that I'm thinking about and would like to hear reactions or comments, and not something I thought about until seeing this slide. So I thank you for the slide. It's very helpful.
And just a point of clarification, a quick correction, the wheelchair lift would not be electric. Those would be ultra low emission propane, just for the record.
Gotcha. Yep.
so what you just said, Sean, I didn't hear you say anything about electric buses.
Not under those contexts, you are correct.
So you just cut out electric.
Cut out electric or say 2 electric, 2 ultra low emission, and 2 or 3 passenger vehicles.
So let me just make sure I understand. The 66 passenger wheelchair lift buses are ultra low emission buses.
That's what we're
So then
recommending.
I would humbly ask for those 2 buses, 2 electric buses, and 3 6-passenger vehicles. 3 passenger vehicles, not 6-passenger vehicles.
I could support that as well.
So this is not a policy or an ideological position, but more just of get the budget passed. I think having the word electric in a proposition is going to hurt the tax cap or revote budget. So I would suggest either, my first choice is not to include it at all. My second choice would be to only have the small vehicles and the ultra low emissions and emphasize that's for wheelchairs.
Okay, at risk of sounding shady, I apologize. Do we have to decide at this stage which type of vehicle we are purchasing? Do we have to specify that it's this number of electric, this number of ultra low emission?
I would.
We've done it in the past. So I would want to consult our attorney before shifting, and it is shady if you change up what we've done every year.
Please, Emily.
You said tonight's the deadline for this. That's because the first legal notice by law has to have a time bill. We want to have special next 2 weeks.
I'll just add that, I'll just add that, at the transportation facility conversation, Chris made it clear. Chris, who was out there as a representative and a staff member, made it clear to us that the technology is not perfect for the EV buses. And maybe that's because of the unique character of our landscape, right? We have winters, we have hills. What I would love to hear, frankly, before we finalize this conversation is the reports that are coming back from the two drivers who have been driving the buses around, right? Who I understand are taking copious notes about the range, about the issues, about what they're actually seeing with those buses. I have faith that Bluebird, this company has hundreds of thousands of school buses on the road. It's not TCAT and whoever they contracted with, right? The scale of this company, Bluebird, is astronomical. Doesn't mean that everything is smooth yet. So there are going to be bumps in the road. There are politics involved. I don't mind slowing down on this. And I would actually love to hear the reports of those drivers and what they're actually experiencing.
Yeah, I can speak to it a little bit. The current e-buses are running well. There will come a time, though, when e-buses will not be able to do our longer routes. And that doesn't mean trips to, athletics, just our normal long routes. And then charge and be able to turn around and do it again. So we haven't reached that capacity yet. We're only talking about, even if you do 4 electric buses, we are at less than 10% of the fleet. But there will come a day, unless the technology changes, or the mandate changes or something happens. But under current technology and our climate and our terrain, our buses will not be able to do the longest routes on our system. And that, that's just a fact, but we're not there yet.
So I'm not trying to see if we would be able to come to any sort of consensus, or if the consensus is because we cannot come to a decision, then we forego the proposition. So I'm appreciative of that. Thank you for that information, Bob. Thank you for, Garrick, your insight about what it may do. Wondering again, my proposal was not set in stone. I didn't even make a motion. I was just trying to hear people's thoughts, and then maybe the idea would be to reframe that to be no electric buses, but 4 low propane buses and 3 passenger buses. Maybe that still gets us to cut it in half, but still keep the fleet moving, which I do have some concern about, especially as we have a bus garage that will continue to age and may not be in a position to support all of our buses as we move forward. But just trying to think what folks would think.
I mean, I'm just gonna add one last thing. It's late. I don't want to have another meeting this week, but maybe we should, because the other thing, I know we're talking about money, we're talking about budgets. We are in a climate crisis. We owe it to our students. We owe it to our community to think about sustainability and think about our environment and think about the city, think about their well-being. And I find it irresponsible to not consider electric buses if we're going to throw this proposition at the table and explain it better and explain the cost better. So to me, it's either electric buses on the table or not. It's the proposition with electric buses with a better explanation of what they are and what they mean. Otherwise, we're doing a disservice to our students and our future.
I'm not quite sure what you're saying, because I definitely, particularly based on what Bob was saying, we need wheelchair buses. And propane, low emissions are better than anything else, and at least we've got some vehicle replacement with a better, more sustainable alternative.
Oh, but somewhere in there, I heard us throwing gas and diesel, and I
Yeah.
don't,
No.
okay.
Aaron, you said that you like humor. I would just say that we only have 2 options before June 1st, because Thursday is the Ithaca Parade, and none of us are going to miss the Ithaca Festival Parade. So trying to figure out how we and when we would have this meeting. Also, this, just for perspective, while this is not our normal practice, The board has long held meetings well past midnight. I'm hoping that we're not there this evening, but I do think it's incumbent upon us to consider what we would do to move forward. And for me, it's not another meeting. It's either we're going to try to solve this evening or we remove it from the ballot. And I don't think we're being irresponsible. I think a number of folks, I know respectfully, I know Jill and Moira have been well engaged in this conversation for quite some time. So it doesn't, for me, it does not feel irresponsible to consider what our options are.
I think we're hearing consensus. Am I not? On the ultra low emissions and the small ones? No?
If we don't vote on any buses right now, and then next year we're at a place where we find that we need a bus 6 months from now, do we have any options?
Do we have to? put
Like,
it-
can we buy a bus next year? Like it's winter, we're struggling. We wish we had asked for a bus, but we
We
didn't.
would probably rent.
What's that?
We'd have to enter into a lease agreement.
We'd have to what?
Enter into a lease agreement to rent.
Oh, okay.
Oh, right.
So I apologize as multitasking, but if you are expecting to purchase buses out of a capital reserve, it requires voter approval to establish it, to fund into it. So if you have surplus at the end of the year, to put money into it, and then also to expend from it. So if we don't have buses in our general fund, which essentially you're asking me to create a budget line, a contingency or a fund balance or reserve budget line within the budget that we just presented to spend general fund monies on buses, that then could be, the answer is yes. We cannot buy buses mid-year without voter authorization. This reserve is exactly that. It's a savings account. It's a pot of money that is set up for a particular purpose to expend for a particular purpose, and the law requires voter approval.
Colleagues. Yes, please.
If we could get a consensus, I say reluctantly, let's go with 4 low emission propane buses, 2 wheelchair accessible, and 3 passenger vehicles. And one thing that's I'll also add, it's not just climate impact, that people in buses, children in buses, breathing gas fumes is not healthy for children and other living things. And we would be, with the proposal I just made, taking 4 gas buses off and replacing them with 4 propane low emission. I think that we have to do at least that.
It'd probably be diesel, actually.
Probably be
That we would be taking out diesel.
taking out diesel. Yeah, diesel is not good for breathing fumes either.
I think I could support that.
So
So somebody should make a motion, I think. I won't support it because I think there's sort of a tacit understanding with a big segment of the community that we're going to make some effort to keep electric buses. I mean, we just spent a lot of money getting the charging stations. Yeah, so
I agree with you, but.
Yeah.
Are the charging stations currently underutilized?
yeah, we don't
We
have,
don't
we
have
have more
enough.
charging stations
Then
than
we
we
have
do
less.
buses. And the electric buses certainly have their place, if not on our longest routes, then on other routes. But
I do agree.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get to.
We
Yep.
don't know how long the rebate.
To get something.
exactly, and there, and right now, you're not gonna get much cheaper, I don't think. So who wants to make a resolution?
Public perception may not be where.
Yeah.
Where we are.
So, Joe, I don't disagree with what you're saying. In fact, I agree, and I would be in support of even the proposition as is with some better communication and some dialogue in various places. With that being said, my stance at this point in time is that 4 low emission propane buses is better than no buses. And so that's where I'm at and trying to think about what does that mean for long-term planning. But with that being said, I'm also of the mindset that for this particular item, if we're not able to build consensus and where we all would support it, this is one board member speaking, then we probably should not put it up for a vote. I think we all would have to be able to speak to it. We cannot use board media or our platforms to support yes on any initiative, but we would be having our own private conversations with a number of folks. That part I know. So without trying to belabor this point much longer, let's see if we can't figure out what we want to do. If we want to remove it, then we remove it. If we feel like we can find a compromise, let's try to find a compromise, but let's keep things going while we still have some clarity.
I don't know. I mean, I'm being very conservative, but I think I'm just a no for the buses this time around. That's just my feeling. But I also think we can vote. I think we should.
You mean any buses?
What's that?
You mean any buses?
Like, right.
Because of the risk it would pose to passing the budget.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know the answer, but I just have a concern. So,
I feel a similar, I feel that risk. I also, as I'm sitting here and I've said some words, I realize I have not been in as many of those conversations as perhaps Jill and Moira.
that's true.
And so for that reason, I feel that I would be willing to follow their lead.
Bob, a question, a policy question, a financial question. Typically, the state will throw around rebates to incentivize people to move in a direction, right? Sort of to make you an early adopter. And then some of those rebates might go away, right? I'm reading that this company is pushing out 500 of these electric buses a month. At some point, do you think that means the state will not be as forthcoming with rebates? Or how has this worked in your experience in the past with these machines?
Well, we're in new territory. You know, we have not been buying electric buses for very long. You know, one would suspect that the cost differential is not going to be borne indefinitely by other taxpayers. So I don't know for sure. Like these, you know, $476,000 per bus is too expensive, I think, probably for any single school district to buy. And yet somebody's paying for the differential, and that money is not unlimited. So I don't know, unless the cost per bus goes down significantly in terms of production and manufacturing. Just from an economic standpoint, I don't see an endless amount of money. You know, the federal government can print money, the state cannot.
I'd like to throw a proposal to y'all and then potentially do a motion because Jill's gut has been right on how folks are feeling about everything. I really don't like the idea of having electric buses on here. I wonder how y'all would feel if we did and modified it saying the purchase of up to 2 electric buses, utilizing rebates to defer costs, but then put the actual cost of what the rebate would be so we can see the actual prices of said buses. And then 4 ultra low emission and 6 passenger vehicles. So we limit it to 2 electric buses. We put the actual cost with the differentials that the rebate would cause. And then we really go out within our own networks and talk about this and how it is money we already have that we're just asking for authorization to use. You can vote no on this, yes on the other if you really don't like the idea of electric buses. But this is our, like, we are talking to our students about sustainability. We can't just do lip service.
Aaron, thank you for that. My modification would be that if we're having a conversation about 2 electric buses, then we have a conversation about only 2 propane low emission buses. That we still cut the proposition in half.
Okay.
So it'd be the 2 low emission propane with wheelchair lifts. And then a conversation again about 3 passenger vehicles. I want to recognize that the Prop 2 was voted down. I get that, which means that it requires change. And I would be able to say, cutting this proposition, for lack of a better word, in half is a demonstration that we've heard folks. We're trying to be fiscally prudent. I think Eldred's question is a great question. The rebates and the grants that we have, then we're continuing to explore, are not going to be around for a long period of time. Especially if we're talking about buying a bus that's 12, let's even say $15,000 more than a traditional bus. But it does speak to our students who have continued to come to the GOAT community, or the GOAT committee, if folks remember, our high school students around sustainability, our own ways in which we're trying to be sustainable. That is something that I could support, and I recognize the inherent risk in putting that out there. And then I also recognize that would require more work on our end to have some conversations with clarity.
Should not be spineless. Karen.
I would
Moira.
support that. I feel pretty confident that if we did something without any electric buses, but had propane emission buses, that we could definitely sell that. And I think it's worth trying to educate people and do what you just proposed. And I think we have enough people in the community who, if we're giving a tax cap, under the tax cap budget, would not see the purchase of 2 electric buses as a deal breaker for the budget as a whole.
All
I'm
right.
hopeful for that.
I am mindful of time. I feel like this has been a fruitful conversation. I hope for everybody. Let's see where we find ourselves, and if it's okay for me to do so, to push a motion or to remove it. If folks feel like they've had enough information and enough dialogue.
I can do a motion unless, okay, so I would move that we change that we put forward proposition number 2, and that the wording be changed to that the Ithaca City School District be authorized to appropriate funds from the district's 2022 Capital Reserve Fund in the maximum amount of roughly half of what is there now, and to expend these combined funds for the following purposes: purchase of up to two electric buses, utilizing rebates to defer costs, purchase of up to 2 ultra-low emission propane buses, and purchase of up to 3 6 passenger vehicles.
Second.
Moved by Jill, seconded by Moira. Additional conversation, questions?
Last question. 'Cause
Please.
It's actually important. Do we want to put that the ultra low emission propane buses are accessible buses with wheelchair ramps?
I'd
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Can we amend the motion to add that?
I'm looking at Emily, who I believe is trying to capture some of this language, or is it somebody else?
Language from the slide, right?
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. So, yeah.
Wheelchair accessible.
Kind of better.
Ramps. Wheelchair accessible propane.
So it would cut the dollar amount in half, if I'm not mistaken. 2 electric buses, 2 propane buses with wheelchair lifts, and 3 passenger buses would be,
Vehicles.
thank you, would be the proposition.
With
that-
wheelchair lifts rather than wheelchair ramps.
So let's see what happens with this, and then we have the language, is it up? Yep, it'd be 1.6, not 3.2. And I think it'd be incumbent upon us to, should this be the majority of the board's wish, to continue to refer to the up to. It means that the board does not have to do so. It's authorization to purchase up to that amount, depending upon, again, successful awarding of any grants or of any additional rebates that may come by way of the state or wherever it may be. But that'd be a conversation for us to have, that we are not mandated to do this. We are asking for the permission to do up to this amount.
Not to throw the conversation into disarray, but I have a question.
Then
Do we have to put all 3 of these proposed purchases in the same proposition? Can we not make proposition 2 the proposition to expand up to X on the electric buses and just make the purchase of the others, propane buses and the low emission propane buses and the 6 passenger vehicles, proposition 3? Why don't we just separate? So people want to vote down the EV buses, they can vote it down without submarining the entire transportation upgrade effort.
Would that be a friendly amendment?
Not sure.
My friend Jill?
I know that it would make me uncomfortable.
It
And
seems a little cluttered.
right, and
That's
not
my
because I don't
concern.
agree with what you're saying. I agree completely, but I think going back with 3 propositions is not something that I could support at this point in time as one board member. I think either we put it up as 2 propositions or we remove it.
I agree. I just think it's.
Too many
Oh.
tasks.
Confusing, potentially confusing.
And to go back to 3 propositions when we just
Yeah.
had such a resounding
Yeah.
rejection of that.
All right, we're closing in here. Trust me. I know it. I can feel it. Garrett,
We're still in discussion.
we are.
All right, I just want to note again, I mean, none of us know. But I think we are putting our entire budget at risk for 2 buses.
Me too.
I think that I heard the community, right or wrong, person after person stood up and said, we are not ready for electric buses. We are not ready. We're not ready. We're not ready. And I think if we put them back on the ballot, the message the community is going to hear is that they didn't listen to us. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think there is a risk that we go to a contingency budget by introducing this additional proposition. So we're gonna potentially tank the entire budget for 2 buses. I think it's a bad idea.
No crystal ball.
I agree with something. Yes, we heard many people, but when we actually talk about many people, how many people were adamant about electric buses? How many people are out there who have given us a direction and a mandate to move towards sustainability? And I think that we can reach them with information. And what we were hearing from the people who were against electric buses was fair amount of misinformation. So that's I hear what you're saying, but my concern is to, just give up. Because some people with misinformation don't want us to do this. It concerns me.
Here. All right.
Well, I go to the casino. I'm a gambling person. Gary just threw something in the middle of the floor that, I think it's important to consider. Am I willing to risk going to a contingency budget for 2 electric buses? I'd have to answer that directly, no. But I don't know if that's the right question. But I'd answer that question, hell no.
Are we done with discussion? The only thing I would say, Garrick, is I also appreciate it, and I would answer the same way Eldred answered it. If it's 2 buses or the budget, then I'm going with the budget. With that being said, I've had a number of people write to me over the past day saying that they support us buying budget or electric buses, just want to know if we're receiving various rebates. And I believe that other folks have received similar messages. They want to know how we're paying for them, much more so than whether or not we're going this way. Now, that's just what I've received, but I'm appreciative of the way in which you framed it and phrased it. We just don't know. We don't know about anything. We don't know what time this meeting is going to end. I know it's not soon. No? So,
I guess, do other board members have ideas about ways we could help? I'm not going to call it misinformation, but help reach out to community members that would see that a word electric and that be a dog whistle for them, right? And help them to understand that we have not been recalcitrant as a board in trying to develop a responsive budget, that we have heard that vote, and that this is still based on all of the meetings we've sat through, all of the information we've gathered, still something that we feel that we do want to support as a district that is not fiscally irresponsible. Is it something, I mean, do we have ideas about how we can reach out? Is Jill getting on Nextdoor every day? Is she?
battery fail?
Is it possible, all right, Katie, I'm gonna try and answer your question. Is it possible, Bob, to put in parentheses after number 1, purchase of up to 2 electric buses utilizing rebates to defer costs of said buses to bring the cost down to X? As
Yeah.
we've seen it, we're talking about X versus Y. Can we add some
would-
math?
I would probably offer language to something to the effect of 2 electric buses not to exceed the cost of 2 propane buses.
Oh,
Right. So, because prices fluctuate a little bit, so to put an actual dollar amount in there, but if we can get 2 electric buses for the same cost, I appreciate taxpayers are paying the freight somewhere. But if we can get 2 electric buses for the same cost, we can get 2 propane buses. Then we can do that.
I like it. I know a lot of people in town who've gone through the electric vehicle thing. They're familiar with rebates, right? This is what our
Yeah.
community is going through. It's not.
So it
new.
might mean that we get enough that we buy 1 because the rebates
Tell
go
you
down a
what,
little bit.
somebody tells me they voted something like that down and passes me in the Prius, I'm gonna flip it over in the street.
Okay, let's. There's a proposal, there's a motion on the table that's been moved. Was it seconded? I didn't.
Yes.
It was seconded, right? So I don't know if adding that additional language.
That's friendly. And I appreciate it.
So Emily, if you stick with me for a second, or stick with our esteemed guests in the audience as well. Bob, what was the language that you were recommending about electric buses in parentheses or wherever?
Let's see. Purchase of up to 2 electric buses utilizing rebates to defer cost. No, that's not working. Purchase of up to 2 electric buses with rebates to defer cost not to exceed the cost of 2 propane buses. Now, that's not perfect English.
Per bus, per bus, per bus.
Well, I wouldn't do it that way. I would do it so that if, huh?
I just said the word commensurate.
Yeah, commensurate. That's the word. Yeah, thank you.
All right,
that
I
is
feel
the-
like I'm not being effective in pushing us in a direction. And I would like to do that, but I don't know if the board is wanting to continue having this conversation.
I thought we were almost there.
We're there. Yeah, we're almost there. I mean, I think it'd be great to decide.
Shall the Board of Education of the Ithaca City School District, the district, be authorized to appropriate funds from the district's 2022 Capital Reserve Fund and the maximum amount of $1,600,000 and to expend these combined funds for the purpose of purchase of up to 2 electric buses with rebates defer costs not to exceed the cost of 2 propane buses. 2, purchase of up to 2 low emission propane buses for long range travel that include wheelchair accessible lifts. And 3, the purchase of up to 3 passenger vehicles to transport students and support student programming, including but not limited to driver's education in support of district departments, including but not limited to transportation, technology, and facilities departments. Question. I will say to you that the first part of that does not read well.
The shall the board part.
The not to exceed the cost of 2 propane buses. I think we should just leave it as with rebates to defer costs. But that's one person. I'm trying to read that. If I'm at the ballot reading that, it gets confusing.
Yeah.
And then I think that our job, our mission, all of us in every way is to try to clearly explain the money is coming from a capital reserve, it's already there. That we won't purchase any electric buses if the rebates do not make them cost effective. And to reiterate, what we've said before about why we are electrifying the fleet and what has been our experience already with the buses we have. That we need to get this message out in every way we can.
So how about this language before I leave it, before I lose it? My apologies. Purchase of up to 2 electric buses only with rebates to defer
Yes.
costs.
Yes, thank you.
And then would that I'm not gonna say it's gonna satisfy all board members, but does that at least add a little bit of
Yeah.
clarity? That we will only purchase these buses with rebates to defer costs. Yep, and I delete whatever you have right there, Emily, just as you have it. So purchase of up to 2 electric buses only with rebates to defer costs. Purchase of up to 2 low ultra emission propane buses for long range travel that include wheelchair accessible lifts and purchase of up to 3 passenger vehicles. Is that friendly, Jill?
Very friendly.
That's friendly.
Call for a vote.
So we will call for a vote now that we've had the conversation, right? Everyone is okay with calling for a vote? All in favor? All opposed? Did you capture it? So the motion passes. So what we'd be voting on next would be the resolution for an annual district meeting as presented here, which includes the modified Prop 2 and all the other language. We do not need to put in an amount for Proposition 1 at this time. Is that correct? We're just authorizing that there will be a vote taking place on June 18th, including Prop 2, and we'll come back to Prop 1 at our next meeting. Questions, board members?
I'm ready.
Nope. we're not
Ready to
done.
move. No, I'm ready to move.
What,
I need to
I
move.
don't think I understand this one.
So this is just
Sorry.
saying that we're going to hold an actual,
On the 18th,
yes, a vote on the 18th.
and it will include 2 propositions.
Oh, I
I
understand.
mean, it will include the budget vote and the one proposition that. we
That's
just went
correct.
over.
Prop one would be the budget and
Yeah.
prop two would be the.
Okay, okay.
Sorry,
Can I read it right from here?
by all means.
Okay, I move to approve the calling the June 18th, 2024 special budget revote meeting of the Ithaca City School District and authorizing related matters.
Second.
Moved by Katie, seconded by Jill. Discussion, conversation, debate. Hearing none, all in favor? That is unanimous of the board members who are here. We will be having a revote on June 18th. We will be putting the legal notices out as soon as possible. We also have two additional resolutions. Jill, are we, because you were the one who has recommended these, are we wanting to entertain these this evening?
I'd like to entertain one because otherwise its utility is just about passed, and I'd like us to go on record for this. The other I'm willing to table.
Okay,
So if we could quickly move to 11.4 resolution in support of New York State Bill, blah, 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 recommended action, motion to approve resolution. Whereas the Ithaca City School District Board of Education wishes to lend its support to the return of teacher evaluations to local school district control. And whereas the board recognizes the undue burden the current state system of an annual professional performance evaluation rating places on teachers and administrators, and whereas the board wishes to have teachers evaluated by a system that recognizes the board's priorities and values, therefore be it resolved that the Ithaca City School District supports they have been passed, so just supports New York State bills returning teacher evaluation to district control. And I say they have been passed because they have been passed, to my understanding, but we would like Governor Hochul to support this. So this would be directed to her at this point. And I so move.
Second.
I heard Moira first. I don't know if that creates anything. Moved by Jill, second by Moira. Jill, remind us again of the last sentence, the language change that we'd be talking about. Therefore, be it resolved.
That the Ithaca City School District Board of Ed supports New York State bills. So remove the passage of supports New York State bills returning teacher evaluation to district control.
Discussion, debate, conversation. Hearing none.
Can you help me understand where this is in the process? Is NISBA behind this? Is NISBA behind?
Yes.
And have any bills been sponsored by the assembly or the?
They not only have been sponsored, they've been passed. So this is a matter of letting Governor Hochul know that we too are in support of this.
What
And-
difference does it make? Sorry. What material difference does it make if the governor supports it or does not support
It
it?
doesn't become law if she doesn't
Oh,
support
we're
it,
still waiting.
Unless it goes back to. the-
unless it goes back and then passes by some.
I did send NICET's commentary on this to all board members, and so who are all, NICET is also in support of this.
And just for anybody who's maybe still listening, NISBA is the New York State School Boards Association, which supports this, and NICE is the New York State United Teachers, which supports this.
Do Lavelle, do the states, the superintendents have a position on this as well?
I'm unsure. I'll find out.
Additional questions? All in favor? That is unanimous. And Jill, I imagine that 11.5 is going to require some conversation.
I will move this quickly. This is a resolution directing the superintendent to negotiate a memorandum of agreement with Cornell University regarding Cornell's annual contribution to the Ithaca City Schools. So I will read this, and then I will recommend that we table it for further discussion at some earlier in the evening point in the future. All right. So whereas the Ithaca City School District Board of Education recognizes the many benefits of Cornell University to our community, and whereas the school district strives to provide a high-quality education to its students, And whereas the children of Cornell students, faculty, and staff make up a significant percentage of the ICSD student population, and whereas Cornell University property is tax exempt, thus keeping much of the land in the school district off the property tax rolls, and whereas the bulk of the district's revenue comes from property taxes, therefore, the ICSD School Board wishes to formalize the mutually beneficial symbiotic relationship of Ithaca City School District and Cornell University by directing the superintendent to enter into negotiation for a memorandum of agreement with Cornell University to include an annual donation of $10 million to ICSD in lieu of property taxes, and I so move. And as I said,
I can second.
Well,
Or tabling.
right.
then I would propose that we table it.
That's where I would start. I wouldn't move
Yep.
it. I propose that we table it until the next.
Okay, that's fine too.
Okay. No objections. Well, we should move second and vote if we're going to follow parliamentary
Oh,
protocol.
I move to table.
Already been moved.
Second.
Oh, I second.
All in favor?
No, let's go on.
And I guess as we think about this, I'd be curious as to what voices were involved in drafting this. I'm glad-
That's all mine.
That's all Jill. And I also will want to know for my own benefit, the process that other similar municipalities went through, their asks, how they calculated those asks, all of that.
I bet you would, and so would I. But we'll see what we can gather before it comes up to us again.
Good folks, I am very appreciative of everyone's patience and resilience, and we will bring this meeting to a close. Thank you. More conversation.